Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Special City Council meeting for Thursday, August 24th, 2017, where we will have our fourth budget hearing. We will begin with a roll call and determination of quorum.
Roberts. Here. Drury. Here. Laurenti. Here. Armstrong. Here. Lewis. Here. Solomon.
Here.
Modrick. Here. Nordstrom. Here. Drew. Here. Scott. Here. We have quorum.
Thank you very much. And would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the
States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. So just an overview of how this evening is going to work. Us on City Council are going to go through the remainder of our discussion agenda. This is as if you're listening in on a boardroom meeting as we discuss the final items on the mayor's proposed budget for 2018. And as a reminder to the council, here's how it's also going to work. We're going to go to the discussion of property tax evaluation, and then we will go to the discussion of 2018 proposed cuts. On this item, and this is important, there are members of the organizations involved that are here. During your time to speak, you can call them up to ask questions if you need to, but we will save the public comment until the public comment section prior to the first reading of the ordinance, and that's when anybody can speak on any matter. But in order for us to have an orderly meeting this evening, when we get to, say, RSVP, if there's someone here from that organization that wishes to speak, they could do it in public comments time, or you can call them up during your allotted time for questions. Yeah, with specific questions. So does that make sense to everybody? Okay, just want to make sure we are all on the same page. We all like a nice orderly meeting, and hopefully we'll get some good business done tonight. So with that, we will go to item number 1 on the agenda, discussion of property tax evaluation. We actually began this discussion on Monday night. I believe it was Monday. Times were flying by. Had some good discussion. We did not conclude with anything, so if anybody wants to start that off, be more than happy to get rolling. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Going once. Going twice. Okay, I think we must be satisfied with that discussion. So now we will get on to item number 2. Discussion of 2018 proposed cuts. We're just going to go in order. The first order will be on the RSVP. Yes, Amanda Scott. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I have to clarify, because you said based on the silence up here that I believe your phraseology was that we're satisfied with that, and no, I'm not. Yeah. So just so you know.
You're not satisfied with the number 1?
Yes.
No discussion on it? Okay.
Well, I'm not satisfied with where it is.
Where it is.
Right.
Is there something you would like to add on that then?
No, I already talked about it.
Okay.
But you just made the statement that says there was no discussion, that we're all satisfied.
No, I'm like, satisfied with apparently no more discussion on the item. Apparently there's no more words to use.
Thank you.
That's what I mean. Laurenti has extinguished everything he has to say on that topic.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So now we will move on to item number 2, discussion of the proposed cuts. The first item on the list is the RSVP program. And certainly if you wish to chime in, we'll begin with Councilman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, let me make a motion to reinstate the $40,000.
Okay, so we begin the discussion with the motion to reinstate the $40,000 that was set to be cut of $40,000 in a second by Roberts, I believe. Is that right, John? So $40,000, and you have the floor.
Thank you.
Point of order. Have to identify a funding source if you're going to add that back into the budget.
I'd like to see if I can get this passed first before.
Identify a funding source.
Yes, I at the appropriate time.
You have to appoint it. You have to identify a funding source.
I want to even see if this passes. So, pardon me. So, if I may continue.
Hold on just a moment, Richie. Pauline, can you chime in here and give us a point of clarification, please?
If you're going to add to the budget, we need a funding source, and I know you don't want to do it now, but honestly, it might matter. It might matter in the vote. And so if you identify the funding source now, that could possibly help your cause if that's what the wishes are.
Can I make a suggestion to Mr. Nordstrom?
Just a moment. Just a moment.
Reallocation of $40,000 from the money that's going to be saved for the $102,000 from detox? So it's just general fund money?
All right, Mr. Roberts, let's wait till let's do this in order. We had Pauline have the floor. Richie, we'll go back to you. Did you want to identify a funding source for this, for the matter of discussion?
I think Alderman Roberts made a good suggestion to start with. First of all, I'd reiterate, I'd like to see if we can get this passed first, and then if there's agreeable to the council to get past the first step and then look at what the funding source is. I'm agreeable to take a look at what Alderman Roberts is suggesting, is taking it from the detox. So just a few words that I would like to add on to the comments that I have noticed with RSVP, and I really appreciate the mayor's sending out the information about the RSVP. A couple of things within this document that I have to say I don't agree with in there, and specifically what the Efficiency Committee came up with. I felt that sitting through that evaluation, the committee had already made up their mind. That's my opinion. That's what the perception was. They already made up their mind before even the evaluation committee started. So just based on the questions that were asked, I felt like, just as an example, is that the basic question of understanding what the cost per volunteer was is rather difficult, number one, to answer, and then all of the money that was used in the questionnaires subject matter had to do with all of the money that RSVP gets, and that money was used for administrating the new volunteers. That money is used for all the volunteers, not just the new volunteers that have signed up recently. There's another point in there about the RSVP not really growing. Yes, I agree. There's small percentages of growth, but the other hand is that generation that's able to volunteer, that generation is passing away. They're going away and they're disappearing, and most of them are just in this case is that they're becoming deceased. So recruiting and retaining new volunteers is obviously a challenge. So that's just a couple of things that I noticed within the mayor's comments. And again, I appreciate what you said in there, but those are the two major sticking points that I have with the RSVP. Thank you. I'll yield for now.
Thank you, Alderman Nordstrom. Now I go to Alderwoman Modrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I ask Pauline a question?
Absolutely.
Pauline, in our current 2018 budget proposal, we've been reducing down contingencies. I know we have a contingency that's been reduced down and out of the budget. Do we still have the contingency in CIP, and is there any other contingencies out there that would create a move over to some of these budget cuts that are being requested in order to find other funding?
Really, no, because they're in different funds, the other contingencies accounts. And if the reallocation of sales tax goes through, the contingency in CIP also goes away and gets allocated differently. So that even if you could transfer that, which technically you could, I would not recommend it because you're taking away from much needed infrastructure projects. It won't be there either.
So if it's not in a loose contingency out there in any area in our financing, then do we only have the opportunity to place this back into the general fund in order to create the undesignated cash differential?
Or you need to cut it from somewhere else. But you have to remember, we are also limited on what undesignated cash is going to be available at the end of the year for the 2018 budget.
And currently, am I correct that it's about 1.3 in our current budget that we're looking at for 2018?
That is correct.
So if we looked at this item and not taking the other ones because we want to stay on track with our agenda, then that would make it 1.3 and 40,000,
Or,
as an example.
yes.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on the RSVP program? Alderwoman Scott.
Yes, the only comment I'll make is that I will not be supporting adding anything else back from the budget unless it's replacing something else in the budget. So I'll be voting no unless there's an actual replacement rather than dipping back into the undesignated cash.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
to be clear, the $102,000 from the detox program that we will release, obviously we know that the police department needs $100,000 for the body cam program as well. Is that not sufficient? Just for point of
For a point of clarification, yes, what Chief Jaggeris suggested by reducing the 100,000 or 102,000 for the detox and then utilizing that to put in the body cam for 100,000, that is a swap. If Alderman Nordstrom, and that's why I tried to ask him to identify a funding source, if he wanted to take 40,000 away from the library's budget line and put it to RSVP, I would consider that. But I am not in favor of just adding willy-nilly money back into the budget unless there is an offset.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. I am in support of the mayor's attempts here. However, I think they're a little short on cuts, given the fact that we are increasing taxes at the same time. We have a net decrease of about $20,000. Whoop-de-doo, in my opinion. But I believe a lot of these cuts, as long as they are supported by a cut from another area, and there are areas, and I'll just make a couple of suggestions. Some of us talked last year on the dais during budget hearings and were surprised by the gargantuous increase to the mission. We went from almost zero to $250,000. So that's one area. We never gave the community an opportunity or never helped the mission in a community campaign to raise those funds. Instead, we jumped in front of the taxpayers and the people who care about those important programs like the mission and let them donate. And what we do is we kill the opportunity for them to receive donations because they hear that $250,000 of their taxpayer money has been earmarked for it by its government. And a lot of those people just pull back. They're like, well, there goes my donation. And that was proven in some of the cuts that were made on the federal level with Meals on Wheels. Some states got more funding from private citizens when they heard that the federal government was pulling back from those programs. And so when citizens find that programs they see great value in, those programs being offered to their fellow citizens, they support them. And government ought to sit back and wait and see what its citizens will do, because citizens are extremely charitable. And if you give them the opportunity, they'll do it. If they believe in that and it's an effective program, especially for a local program like the Mission. So that's one program that we can look at. I think the detox funds are off the potential funding for this. I won't support that because I believe the body cam program is much more important, far more important. So in my opinion, I won't support any motion that goes to those funds to use that for this. One other area that some of the council will remember who have been here long enough, the Performing Arts Center came back, if you all remember, they came back that next year and they wanted just stopgap funding for that 1 year. That was it. That was all they were going to need. And then they were going to be okay. Well, here we are. We still have them in this next budget. So that's another area that we can reallocate or cut from one and give to another. And I'll support that as well. There may be other areas as well that can be identified, but I am with Alderwoman Scott that I will not support adding to the budget. We need to find a source that we can reallocate, cut from one area, and give to RSVP, and I will support that. I yield.
Thank you. Now go to Alderman Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to make the motion that we cut that funding from the performing arts because of the fact that they did just ask for 1 year of stopgap funding in there. And I'd like to take that and roll it over into RSVP. And the difference, I think we could probably take away from the mission, and probably a little more if we need it. I know there was a cut there. I was looking for my page on that, and I can't find it, but
Alderman Roberts, are you proposing a substitute motion? Is that what you're trying to do?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I'm trying to make sure I understand, because you've seconded the
okay.
motion on the floor, and now you have
I'll
a
make
substitute.
a substitute motion to cut the funding for the performing arts.
In the amount of?
36,000, I believe is what it is. I was looking for the page and couldn't find it. Is that right, Pauline? Is it 36,000?
36,100.
36,100. And then the difference we can take out of the mission, that's what, 4,900 or whatever. So we have enough funding to refund the RSVP.
Second.
So, for clarification, you're proposing as a motion to cut the performing arts by 36,100 and give the difference to the RSVP program?
Yes.
Okay. And we had a second by Lorenzi, I believe. Okay, that's the current motion on the floor. Are you done? Okay. Alderwoman Drew, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will not support the mission, or excuse me, replacement by Councilperson Roberts. I'm just really shocked by that suggestion, actually. And why I'm not going to support that is because the performing arts is not a redundant program. It's a standalone program that doesn't have any other place where this kind of work gets done. So I would say they're standalone, that there's no other theater, performing arts things going on. However, with RSVP, we do have the Volunteer 211 service, and that actually is working with RSVP groups in other cities. Senior centers are sometimes taking on the RSVP work as well. So we have some options. There's other people that are doing volunteer work and placing volunteers, whether it's through churches or senior centers or our cultural centers. So the RSVP might have outlived some of its usefulness at this point, and we're just doing a redundancy. So I will not support the RSVP funding, and I will not support Councilman Roberts' substitute motion.
Alderman Lewis, you have yet to speak, so you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm going to try to get this out of the way as quick as I can because I know there's a lot to discuss here, but I won't be supporting this motion just because performing arts, as I understand it, was not proposed as a cut, and I don't think they're even here to defend themselves at this point, and it's just not something that we were discussing before, so it's a little bit out of the blue sky. I do understand I understand where you're coming from. Actually, I remember that conversation quite well, but at this point, I'm not going to punish them for not being here to, they had no heads up at all this was coming, and I just don't think it's fair. We've never discussed it necessarily, and I kind of support the performing arts anyway, and then as far as the rest of this goes, the RSVP program, I'm definitely on the fence about this. I could probably go either way. I do really respect the mayor for taking this opportunity to try to cut the budget and, find areas that are probably duplicated other places in the community. But one thing I've noticed about some of these cuts and some of the things we're doing and we're proposing tonight is we're going after the places that seem less likely and have the least amount of ability to defend themselves. And we're going after things that seem to make the biggest impact in people's lives, like the arts and volunteerism and things like that. And the things that make our community better as a whole. I know that we all want perfect streets, but I would rather have a community that's got decent streets and people feel like they're part of that community. And this is part of those things that make people feel like they're part of the community. It's money we spend now, and otherwise we spend it later. Our police department, I support them 100%. I support the fire department 100%. But I don't want to have to give them money later because we're not doing our job now and making diversionary places for children to go. And for the RSVP program, yes, I understand. I think maybe in a few years it might naturally kind of go away. But right now we have a generation of people that are not proficient in technology. And it's just a generational gap. It's nothing against them. It's just the way they grew up. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But at this point, they need that resource to call on the phone. They're used to calling someone up on the phone, someone helping them out. That's that's just part of the service I think we should need to do for our seniors. Our seniors don't get a lot of our money up here. They get a lot of, they don't get a lot of things sent towards them from our community. We get a lot of money towards youth and diversionary programs, and I will 100% support those, but I don't feel like our seniors are stood up for enough in that regard, and so I would like to just continue to support them. I know it's a lot of money in some regards, but out of a $66 million general fund, it seems like not a lot. Like I said, I totally respect the mayor for doing it. It's one of those things I could have probably gone either way, but when I started thinking about the idea that some of these people just don't have the ability to get online or make that, it's available, it's there, and that's basically what I feel about it. So hopefully I will be supporting to save RSVP, basically.
Thank you, and I'll go to Alderwoman Modrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to defend the performing arts because this is kind of pulling out from the air where a funding source is going to come from. We still have a number of others on the agenda, A through G, to discuss. So now we're going to pick on some of the resources of this community that are used by so many people, and if we pick and prod this way, we're not doing a very good, diligent job of our budget process here. Where these notable cuts are, these cuts come out and go from the general fund to these amazing resources that we have in our community, and that's where it should come from. And to pick on another entity that hasn't had a chance to discuss or talk, or for any of us to really research what is performing arts providing to the community, that's the wrong pick on. I think it's wrong. I mean, if we do that, then are we going to go all the way back to the beginning process and start doing the same thing and really interrupt the process that we're doing to? So I think that's the wrong direction to go in. It's not... It's just not good budgeting. Where these notable budget cuts are on our agenda, these would all come back from the general fund on a $66 million budget, and it's currently running in a deficit of 1.3. So now maybe we're at 1.31, maybe we're at 1.4, but that's where it needs to come from. None of these items on our cuts are really ready to be cut or eliminated. And maybe we could create a process for that, and maybe we could do a strategic plan, but to just say you're out of a job in 3 months is not fair to the community, and it's certainly not fair to our elderly who have earned the time and the volunteer right to do and provide for our citizens. And we have had so many responses. It's an outpour and a cry from the public, and that's the people talking, and we need to be listening. And they're saying this is important to our elderly, and it's important to our community, and it's important to the organizations. It doesn't duplicate yet. Perhaps there's a time we can, but this is the wrong time to eliminate, and it's definitely wrong to start trying to pull from the arts or any place else when we haven't done our own research. It's not on the block. It shouldn't be. I cannot support Mr. Roberts, but I can support keeping RSVP and pulling it out of the general fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Modrick. We now go to Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just I have a clarifying question on the substitute motion, because I believe what Alderman Roberts proposed is not what you stated. So I just want to, can you please clarify what the substitute motion is?
So here's how I perceive it, and Alderman Roberts, if I get this wrong, please correct me, okay? Substitute motion on the floor is to cut $36,100 from the performing arts budget as proposed by the mayor to the RSVP program. Is that add that amount to the RSVP program?
So what I heard Alderman Roberts, and I'm just clarifying because I thought that was two pieces. I thought to fully reinstate the 40,000, you also said to subtract 4.9 million from. No. Oh, sorry. 4,900. Let me put the comma in there. 4,900.
And
go ahead, Alderman Roberts.
I did put that in there, and I thought
is that part of the motion or not? That's my question.
You know, it is part of the motion to fully fund them,
So the additional $4,900 from the Cornerstone Rescue Mission is what you're saying? To make up an even $40,000. Is that?
That's what I heard, so
Okay.
that's what I was
All
clarifying.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your clarifications. Alderman Lorenzi, it's all you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to chime back in because I wanted the rest of my colleagues to hear, some of what I guess hasn't been said at this point on this particular issue. And to, my colleague, Alderman Lewis, I just want you to think about the fact that you remember the conversation we had with the Performing Arts Center. The reality is that they knew this was going to be a 1 year of funding. And in fact, there was a very good debate. I can't remember the vote, but I think it was actually fairly close at them getting that 1 year. So I don't think they expected to be able to get the money. I don't know what went down because we weren't part of the budget creation this year as far as that detail. But I think for those types of things that are getting a 1 year reprieve, those kind of things might get bounced off of council before the budget's created the following year, because those are going to be automatically contested by some of the council, if not all of the council, depending on who gets elected and reelected. So from that point, and on top of that, the Performing Arts Center is extremely important, I agree. As a person who loves fine arts and grew up in fine arts, that Fine Arts Center received over $3 million in taxpayer money out of the Vision Fund. That's how important that Fine Arts Center was. And they were going to be on their own. That was the whole plan. That was the whole part of that MOU with the city. And then they came in and said, well, we don't, from a janitors, we don't have a plan yet to keep, a janitorial. If I remember right, that's kind of where the conversation went. And so there was this agreement that they were going to get this stopgap for 1 year. We need to stand behind that. We need to stand behind that because they have received millions of taxpayer dollars through the Vision Fund. So, from that standpoint, and then from the argument that was made about that we need to think about this more strategically, or that we need to have some more strategic way of looking at cuts. I don't know what that means. To me, that's code language for we don't want to cut anything. That's what it is. Because we've known about these cuts for quite some time, and I haven't seen anybody talking about some strategic way of cutting them. Does that mean we cut all of them? Should we cut them all? Just completely to zero? Then it's fair. So, from that standpoint, we have to make budget decisions like a family does. We have to make priorities. And I've talked about how much revenue this city's making year over the last 10 years. We can't, the mayor is taking some, I think, steps that haven't been made for quite some time. And here we are wanting to make sure that we get these things right back in there. And we want to add to the budget and keep adding to the budget when, in fact, some of us have already acknowledged that we're spending money that we don't even know we have. It's called undesignated cash. Hopefully it will cover. If not, then staff is going to have to scramble, and they'll do it because they've done it before, and they've been doing it this year. But we shouldn't be planning. We shouldn't be budgeting to spend money that we don't have, and that's what we're doing. And this is an attempt to start reining in some of the things where government doesn't belong. It's just plain and simple. It's extremely important to me. But I'm not going to go to government and say, therefore, you should fund it. When in fact, it should be citizens who support those things and try to spread the word and help raise campaign funds for all these different things. It's one thing to say these things are extremely important, which we all agree that they are. But the bottom line is, are you going to go as far to say, therefore, government should pay for it? I'm not going to go there. That's not where it belongs. In fact, government tends to screw up things it gets involved in because it wants to control it. We know this. How many different programs have we seen so much waste in? Not just in the city, but at our state and federal levels. And here we are trying to inject ourselves and keep ourselves injected. I urge my colleagues to support this because it cuts from one area. It maintains a reduction. And that is what our job is to do, is to make sure that we use these funds in a frugal manner and that we start reining in government's arms a bit. That's what limited government is about. I yield.
Go to Alderwoman Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because we eliminate this funding tonight does not mean RSVP can no longer exist. They certainly have the wherewithal and the volunteer groups that can raise money. I see Lynn Taylor-Rick is out there tonight from 211. Chair, could I ask her a couple questions, please?
If she's willing, absolutely.
Yep.
Go ahead and go to the podium over here. And if you would, Ms. Rick, identify yourself for everybody.
My name's Lynn Taylor-Rick. I'm the Volunteer Connections Coordinator with the Helpline Center. A lot of people know us as a 211 Helpline Center.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. So in other communities, RSVP operates under your banner or your organizational banner. It's a statewide federal program. I'm not really sure, but they're really kind of operating with your group. Is that correct in other places?
Well, the Helpline Center main office is in Sioux Falls, and I believe it was 2 years ago they did take on the RSVP program in Sioux Falls.
And if that would happen here, would you be able to somehow have a way to communicate with those seniors by telephone or in a way that wouldn't be just on computer?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of us taking on, completely taking on the RSV program, that's not something our president really wants to do because they've found it somewhat restrictive working with it in Sioux Falls. But I work with seniors right now already. I get calls from seniors all the time. And I work with them either directing them to do things online, which a lot of them do, but a lot of them don't want to. And when that happens, I do a search of our database and find some opportunities for them, and then I direct them who to call, get a hold of the agencies, make sure they know they're going to be calling, and just kind of support them in that connecting.
And since you're in the volunteer business, have you ever heard of any other partnerships with RSVPs that are being, like maybe partnering with senior centers or those kinds of things to continue to operate?
Locally?
Well, anywhere.
Okay. I guess I haven't. I know in Sioux Falls before, the Helpline Center took on RSVP. I'm sorry, I can't remember which. It was another local agency in Sioux Falls, and then they decided they couldn't do the funding anymore, and it was going to I was told it was kind of a nostalgia thing that Helpline Center took it on board, but I'm not sure in other communities.
But if we ask you to work this out with the RSVP group, you would be willing to do that?
I mean, my goal is always to get as many people volunteering as possible. And each and every day, that's what I do. I work with volunteers and agencies, supporting them, connecting them. I have an online database, and there's right around 200 different things on there. So yeah, I work with everybody of all ages, from kids up to I think 90 was the oldest call I think we had. So yeah, I mean, I'm already doing that, and I'm willing to continue and enhance it a little bit within what we can do. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Lynn. I really appreciate your comments on that. So we're not saying that RSVP has to go away. It just might have to morph into something different that the city doesn't necessarily participate in. And in that way, I guess I am echoing Steve Laurenti's comments that the government doesn't have to do everything. There can be people out there that will support organizations like RSVP, and also partnerships that will continue to support the senior volunteers in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now go to Alderwoman Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. After the cuts were announced, as Mrs. Modrick mentioned, we were actually bombarded with emails regarding the RSVP program. So I did a lot of investigation here. Based on what Mrs. Drew and what Ms. Lynn Taylor-Rick had said, I am confident that the RSVP program can be absorbed into other places. Specifically, I spoke with the schools. They are very excited about this opportunity to get more people in their schools. I think that would be wonderful from a Circle of Life program. And I know that Dr. Simon will be unveiling a strategic strategic plan on September 10th, and they're going to be establishing some volunteer opportunities that will align with their strategic goal. And if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to Dana Livermont as well as Colleen Bashara. So if anybody has any concerns or they think that they're not going to be able to volunteer within this community, that is a misconception. We value our volunteers, we value our seniors, and we want them to be an intricate part of this community. I yield.
Thank you. Now I'll go to Alderman Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I guess not yet.
They'll start that room.
Mr. Chairman. So, okay, getting back to just a point of order for everybody that's listening at the dais here. If you vote for this, you've got to make sure you realize, even if you want to get rid of RSVP, you'd be cutting the performing arts at the same time. So think about that if you're going to vote affirmative on this motion, because I know there's some talk out here about cutting, restoring the RSVP program or whatever, but you'll be cutting the performing arts at the same time. So think about that before you do it. Now, getting back to my original point, I just want to balance the budget on the backs of the seniors and the children, and that's what I think we're doing with some of these program cuts. If we keep the no nonsense cuts like the crossing guard, and the human services investments and the live streaming, we're still saving $85,000 out of the budget, which isn't a lot, but neither is $186,000. I mean, we're not killing it either way, folks. And I don't think this is not going to be one of those things where everybody's got a better life or the community has better roads because we cut this money. What it is going to do, in my personal opinion, is its perception is reality. We're giving the message to certain groups and certain people that we don't care about them in this community. Whether or not you think that's, maybe I'm being over dramatic, but I don't think so. I think that's very important that we let our seniors know we still value with them. I think this program will phase itself out naturally because, like I said, there's a generational shift that's going on, and people of a certain age just aren't as comfortable with technology of the internet or making this kind of phone calls. They like that one-on-one touch. They still want the feel of, going down to it's like all the service organizations are losing people because no one volunteers and goes to those organizations like they used to, like the Elks and the VFW and all those things. People don't go to those like they did, but there's a certain generation that does. And this is still part of that generation, I think. And I do appreciate the fact that people are trying to cut the budget. I get all that. I'm not going to cut the performing arts, even though, can I ask a question first? Maybe Pauline might know this answer. When's the first time the performing arts came to us with that proposal? I'm thinking circa 2013, if memory serves me. Yeah. Where's Nick at? Sorry. Okay. Nick, if you could jump up. Is he here? There he is. Yeah, yep. Sir, if you could identify yourself just for the record real quick.
Sure. I'm Nick Johnson, the Executive Director of the Performing Arts Center.
Thank you, sir. Quick question for you. So when did we come to us with that first original proposal for the stopgap funding, basically for that 1 year?
This is my memory. I was not here in 2013, but the council did give the Performing Arts Center about roughly $50,000 of operational funds right at the end of 2013.
Okay.
I believe Mayor Quaker asked that we would sign something that basically said we wouldn't ask for more money, and we politely declined. We said we would ask if we needed, and of course, we can be turned down at any time. So we received that was given in a lump sum in December of 2013. Perhaps Pauline could say whether it was money that was.
So there was no MOU between you and the city at this point?
But no, then we requested, there was no more money in 2014-15, but then we did receive a $15,000 subsidy in 2016, and now we're receiving the $36,000 subsidy for 2017.
Okay. All right. That makes a little more sense to me because I just thought it was something out of nowhere. All right. Well, anyway, getting back to thank you, sir. I'm sure you get questions in a second. You might want to stay up there because I think Ms. Modrick's going to have a question for you anyway. But, okay, well, just getting back to what I said, I just prefer to take a holistic approach towards this community, and we support a lot of other things in this community that other people probably don't necessarily agree with. A lot of sports, a lot of other things for the youth. I wrote a big opt-out piece for the opt-out, which I got a lot of heck about because it was raising taxes. But as I made that point, then I'll make it again. We pay now or we pay later, folks. Just remember that. Keep those kids out of jail.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We'll go to Alderwoman Modrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Nick, for hanging out. So as that was stated, I think that clarified that question of a stop payment because it wasn't happening It hasn't been happening. They're receiving 36.1 this year. The request is to match the same, 36.1 for 2018. And in their agreement, they actually have a council liaison that's actually a voting member. That's part of the agreement that they have. So we represent on behalf of the City of Rapid City on the performing arts. That's how important and how valuable it is to the City of Rapid City. I believe that the mayor left the 36.1 in there realizing that it was an important and valuable investment that reinvests itself. It definitely works towards the enterprising side, but the tangible and intangible reinvestment is priceless, as so many of these projects that we're talking about tonight. So with that, because I believe that the motion that as it stands on the floor of moving funds out of performing arts, I think it's an uneducated motion based on what arts does. Nick, can you, my goodness, we could probably go on for hours, but can you give a defense on where we're at and what performing arts has done and is doing, and why it needs to continue with the relationship of the City of Rapid City?
Certainly, you may have a time limit on this, I'm sure, so I'll try to be as brief. In a nutshell, some statistics. When we opened in 2012, 2013, we run on roughly an academic schedule in a fiscal year that's July through June, so I think of it in those terms. A partial year, we might have had 17,000 attendees through the Performing Arts Center, and now we're closer to 35,000 annual attendees. Probably 5,000 of those a year are young people receiving educational activities, participating in educational activities. Some of the bulk of the performers on the stage, the vast majority of performers on stage are local citizens who are doing this out of their love for arts. It's providing them with a professional facility and staff who can support that. It's not, we don't import a lot of performers from out of state for the stages. We support many, many nonprofits. We're created of a coalition of other nonprofit arts organizations, the Symphony, the Rapid City Children's Chorus, the Black Hills Community Theater, two other choruses. All of these are, to those people, those activities are important to them as softball or basketball or extracurricular sports activities that many of us do as well. It's something that, and they can do that for life. So we're supporting many citizens through our programs. We're supporting other nonprofits that don't have a home if we're not there. We're trying to keep those costs to those nonprofits down. We don't take grants from Allied Arts because we receive, because that would be money we would be taking from other nonprofit arts organizations. If we don't receive this funding, we will have to fundraise even harder from the private sector, also going to the same donors who support those other performing arts organizations. It becomes a bit of a vicious circle as far as funding goes. So that's a bit of a rationale. I wish I could put it better, but any other questions, please let me know.
And maybe you can add the diversity of the board, because I think you mentioned a little bit about it, and we've got a few here. Again, some of those key board members that are part of the quality of life, our comprehensive plan, our core values, our viable living is based so much on the arts. And so again, if you could share what that board entails and how strong the input is and what good works is being done by that board and some of those members that are they're serving.
Certainly, again, we're a coalition of nonprofits, and so we have representation from 3 different nonprofit arts organizations. The mayor has 2 appointees to our board. The city council has 1 appointee. The school district, I should really mention, we really are a 3-way partnership. The money that Mr. Laurenti mentioned, the vision money that helped seed that was matched equal dollar for dollar with private funds. So there's been support from every sector of the community for this. We have business leaders on our board. So everyone has input on what goes on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So thank you, Nick. I think that's helped a little bit. I mean, we're doing Education 101 on performing arts in 10 minutes or less. But what you're hearing is that the city has an investment in performing arts. This is not the place to go to defund something, just picking something out of the air and saying, well, we'll just cut from here because that seems like a simple move, when in fact, there's terrific gears and wheels that are turning that are part of this community, and so I cannot support the current substitute motion on the floor, and thank you for that, Nick.
Thank you, and if I may, counsel, interject before we go to Alderman Nordstrom. It is a little ironic that we're talking about perhaps cuts in the arts when our sales tax is greatly influenced by the arts. In fact, we have 3 million people who come here for a very monumental art project each year, known as Mount Rushmore, and then not even to add to that, Crazy Horse. The arts do quite a bit for us. That was actually a government-sponsored art project, Mount Rushmore, and I'd say it's paid off pretty well for us. The other thing that I can't help but notice is I look at the big picture, I look at the department requests, and the largest department requests we have, unfortunately, is from the police department. We have a lot of resources that go into enforcing our laws and serving our city. I absolutely support them 100% on that. But what does that tell me? It tells me crime, and in particular substance abuse, is out of control, and that kills our bottom line. How about we invest in things that actually reduce the impact of the negative consequences of things like substance abuse, juvenile delinquency, and you name it, because people get in trouble when they get involved in things they shouldn't, such as substance abuse, such as when they don't have a place to belong and getting in with the wrong crowd. People who have, maybe low self-esteem from not being a part of something bigger than themselves, but they get involved in things like performing arts, and suddenly they're part of something, they feel a reason to live, a reason to get up. It's about the quality of life. Not only add to the public safety component, but what about economic development? Why do people choose to live here? You may have had a nurse or a doctor give you care that decided to move here because of the quality of life, because of the arts programs. And if we invest in those things, that helps us recruit things. But I'll tell you the number one challenge we have in economic development is workforce development. It is recruiting, finding, and keeping talent right here in Rapid City. That's what we need. And when we have quality of life initiatives, as what we're talking about here, and we have to be strategic, and we can't fund everything. We wish we could, and Alderman Laurenti's right. We have to make some hard choices. We do. But we're talking about things that invest into our public safety so that a generation from now, maybe we won't have the substance abuse issues that we have. And many of us have been impacted, myself included, by loved ones who are down and out with substance abuse. If you've ever raised a teenager, you're always worried, I hope nothing goes wrong. But I'll tell you, having a child who's involved in the arts and seeing that energy channeled in a positive direction gives her hope, gives me hope, gives us all joy, and everybody gets to enjoy it. We have quality of life, public safety, quality of life, and how that impacts our economic development. Because if you care about our economic development, that's our future sales tax revenue. That's what pays our sales tax, property taxes, and so on. And then when you add into that the whole tourism thing, the fact that, by the way, that is a government-sponsored art project that actually brings in 3 million visitors into our community, that does say something. And so I want to make sure that we value the arts in the right way. I'm not saying at the expense of everything else. Everything is very important, and we do have hard decisions to make, and we will have to make some this evening and in this process. But I just want to take a moment just to share where I'm coming from. I'm not going to make any promises on all the funding levels at the moment. I'm wrestling with some of these. But in terms of value as a community, we stand on the shoulder of giants, and we have a rich history of supporting the arts. Just look at the Dolphin Arts Center. Look at everything we've done. It's tremendous, and we have a lot more great things to come. Rapid City is the city that we build, and I want to make sure people know the possibility exists here, and the arts are a great thermometer to show us that. So thank you for giving me a moment. We'll now go to Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just need a clarification on a couple of points, is that the sponsorship that RSVP has. And I'm going to start my question off with the City Finance Officer, Pauline Sumption. Can you explain a little bit about the background on sponsorship, how the city got involved in the sponsorship for RSVP?
Sure. When it first originated in Rapid City, the federal government who granted the money to pretty much funded 100%, said that they had to be attached to a governmental entity. And so the city of Rapid City stepped up to the plate, and we've been a sponsor of the program ever since.
Thank you. And then another clarification is that one of the major grant funding sources that RSVP gets is from the, and I stand to be corrected, is one of their major funding sources, the Corporation for National and Community Services, CNCS.
Correct.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yes. If I'm understanding how that works, that's the largest grant funding source that RSVP gets?
That is correct, but that's the funding that used to be at 100% between the federal and the state level, and during the sequestration, that got cut to about $42,000 a year, so it does not even pay for half of our payroll.
The administrative costs.
Correct.
Is basically. If I can address a question to Ms. Lynn Taylor-Rick, please.
If she's willing, absolutely.
Ms. Rick, one of the major components for RSVP is the sponsorship. Are you familiar with what we're referring to?
No, I guess I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Okay, perhaps Pauline can explain, our Chief Financial Officer can explain a little bit more in detail, but essentially our RSVP is required to have a sponsorship, and that's how the city got involved in helping out RSVP, is because the city at that time took on the role of being the sponsor for the RSVP, and as stated earlier by the finance officer, is that the funding was cut on the federal level. Can you absorb that the sponsorship? One question, and then the other question is understanding the grants for the RSVP program coming from the Corporation and National Community Services, CNCS.
Well, my conversations with the president of the Helpline Center is that we're not in a position that we could take on that sponsorship role like we did in the Sioux Falls office. So I don't believe that's something that could happen. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does.
I mean, as I mentioned, my goal is always just to get as many people volunteering as possible. So I'm not for or against this. I just want to make sure that you have accurate information about what we do, and we work with seniors, we work with kids, we work with, you name it, age-wise. But we're not in a position out here to take that sponsorship on, and take that additional cost.
Thank you. I appreciate your being forthright with this. One of the other considerations that we can take on, and I probably should wait until we get a decision on this first substitute motion, but taking a serious look at how this sponsorship works, and so that we can still have something along the line for an RSVP program. At this point, I'll yield, but I would like to reserve comments after this vote.
Okay, go to Alderwoman Scott. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification, when you do the math, Alderman Roberts wanted to fund the $40,000 in the substitute motion. That would make $3,900 from the mission instead of the $4,900. And then also, the Chief Financial Officer did let me know that, just for the City Council to be reminded once again, that the mayor did already cut the Cornerstone Missions contribution this year from the city funds to $175,000 versus the $250,000 it was allocated in 2017. So just those 2 points, that because they affect this current substitute motion on the floor. And then I wanted to thank my peers up here for this great discussion, because I think with the 10 people we've got on City Council, we really do bring 10 different viewpoints to all of the issues that come before us. And, what I've heard up here is I've heard a lot of support for the arts. I've heard a lot of support for our kids' sports programs, as well as our intramural through the Parks and Recs Department for young adults, and even some of us old people when we want to get out and try to participate. And there's also a lot of support for our schools And so what we're hearing is there's a lot of different programs, and I think there's a lot of crossover. So really, I don't think anybody up here, not one of the 10 of us up here, are saying we're against anything. Really what we're trying to do is take a look at a checkbook and say, with the limited funds coming in, what can we afford to finance? That's what we're trying to say. And much of the conversation up here right now on this motion is about the RSVP program, because it's currently on tap. But as we've been talking about for the 4 meetings on budget hearings that we've had, we're currently dipping into the general funds $1.3 million. That's $1.3 million that's being expended out of the checkbook that is going to go away. It's not a funding source. It's not a revenue stream that's going to be made up next year. It's going to be spent, and once it's spent, it's gone. And if it goes to fund operating cost, whether it's wages or supplies, we have to identify another funding source next year if we're going to keep that spending up at that same level. I have been a proponent that we should set a budget based on the revenue streams coming in, not balancing it based on hopeful dollars that are still left over in the checkbook. The overall budget for the general fund last year was increased 7%, and it was passed and adopted by City Council. The mayor's proposal this year for the general fund, it's a little more complicated this year. Once you subtract out the enterprise funds that were being absorbed into the general fund, it's a 4% increase. People, that's an 11% increase in 2 years in the general fund. 11% extra spending in the general fund. The enterprise funds, the water department, water reclamation, the landfill, those support themselves because they're rates. They're not supplemented by tax dollars, property tax dollars. They're not supplemented by sales tax. Those are paid for by the rates in which they operate. But the general fund that supports our police, our administration, our fire department, our parks and rec, all the stuff that we're talking about, that really give us the safety and the health and then the quality of life that we all want, that's a limited funding source. So that's what we're trying to sit up here and discuss. And yes, we can talk about millions of dollars versus $184,000 that's being cut. We're also looking at the revenue sources, because I know there's a couple council members up here that don't want to take the CPI increase of $161,000. Well, if you cut that, just like we're trying to add something to the budget, you have to identify what revenue stream you're going to use that for. When you try to take a cut, I'm just reminding Alderman Laurenti, if he's going to try to cut that, he has to identify what he's going to offset by removing from the budget, because you can't cut that revenue source and just leave it unbalanced. So I want to express again, I appreciate the conversation. Full support of the arts and the sports and everybody, every citizen in our community, from the day they're born until the day that they actually need the volunteers to come help them. I probably shouldn't plug United Way, but I know United Way Day of Caring is coming up, and we do a lot of volunteerism when we go out and help all the other citizens in our community. So I appreciate this, but I will tell you, a lot of my decisions tonight are going to be on, I'm still greatly concerned that there is $1.3 million that we are overspending in this 2018 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Go to Alderwoman Armstrong.
Okay. I value everybody's input here on the dais as well as in the audience, but I'd just like some clarification on the actual motion that's out, and if we're going to vote on it so we can move forward. We have 6 other projects that we need to discuss, and I really would like to get closer to that first reading of the ordinance.
So we all want the same thing. Substitute motion on the floor as presented by Alderman Roberts was to cut the Performing Arts Center by $36,100 and $3,900 from the Cornerstone Rescue Mission in order to have $40,000 distributed to the RSVP program. And I have a question for the mayor if you're done. Okay. Mr. Mayor, one of the things as I'm looking at funding sources, so one of the things I just don't think I've had a chance to ask you is about the 4 positions in the Human Resources Department that you're going to add. And this is relevant to all of our discussion tonight. Do you have a game plan on what those positions are? Because right now, all I know is I have 4 positions. I want to say it's $226,322. Is that somewhere? Anyways, the salaries for those positions, do we have an idea what those positions are going to be? Is it right now kind of 3 or 4 at kind of a couple $100,000? Do we have a specific plan, or is it a very general one at this point?
Yes. It is, we are developing the job descriptions now and developing the plan now. The timing of everything would not allow us to have a complete plan today, but waiting until next year for a complete plan implementation will be too late. So I have budgeted $170,000 plus benefits for approximately 4 lower level positions, or perhaps a combination of 2 lower level and 1 higher level. But we're ongoing, in an ongoing manner, evaluating the needs. But these are needs that will need to be fulfilled in 2018.
So the thing is, have you defined positions for, you don't know the exact needs? I mean, you know maybe some, in general some of them, but are we to say 3 or 4 when it's kind of ishy, I guess? And I would have felt better if you said we have 4 positions. 2 of these are payroll specialists, 1 HR generalist, and a manager or something. But right now I just have, hey, just 4 HR, additional HR positions.
Yeah, the timing of the problems needing correction and the implementation of the analysis and building of the plan to reorganize has not afforded us the ability to have a rock-solid plan for exactly what is needed today. We're getting very close. We have a number of positions on paper, and that's going to be part of a larger reorganization plan, but those are important. That type of treatment is important, and I feel like I was being realistic in the amount of, but frankly, I had to guess. I had to guess at the amount of wages and benefits to apply to that because of the budget deadline.
And you know, that's part of what I'm wondering about is if it was based on some concrete needs, it's easy to say, okay, we see that. But with you having to guess, I'm wondering, do you even know if you need 3 or 4, or if you only need 2? Do you need 2 HR generalists who can perform multiple duties, and it still significantly boosts our human resources department? Because adding on an employee is difficult because we tend to keep those employees. The salary and benefits are our greatest expense. They rise at a very high rate every year. So it's a big deal for us to take on additional staff. And I'm for it when we need it. And I'm in human resources. I have a background there. I see a value there. And I am in agreement that we need to boost it there. I don't know if guessing that we need to boost it by 4 people I think that's about where we're going to need when we're debating very concrete things and we have jobs that we may or may not need. I guess that's the point. Is I don't know do we need all 4 of those positions at $170,000, or could we divide it by? Could we take a fourth of it out because you don't know for sure to apply to some of these kinds of things? So, and that's where I'm getting at. And so I need something concrete, I guess.
My advice is to keep that $170,000 in there concretely. Because we are servicing nearly 800 full-time employees and over 1,100 part-time employees with approximately 3 active HR employees. And by any measure, that is grossly understaffed, and we have been presented with a number of threats and opportunities in our human resources function lately. And so we have been working diligently for a couple of months to design the reorganization. And it's very likely that I'll have that together in the next month, but I can't with any confidence tell you that it's more likely 3 or more likely 4 at this point. I've put in my best estimate of where I think we'll arrive.
So if we got to 6, and that would add 3 positions, that would double the staff that we have in
That's
the
correct,
department.
and that may or may not be enough.
And my guess is you'll have to take a year to evaluate that and see where it goes from there.
Point of order.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, but we were talking about the.
And
motion
the reason this matters is because we're talking about funding sources for all, and this is why it matters. We're talking about funding sources, and as we get through this list, we either go, our funding sources are to add to undesignated cash, which I know some of my colleagues do not support, cutting one other program or department, I hate to cut departments, or looking at the new additions, such as the 4 additional staff members just in human resources, and see, do we need all of that? And I'm finding out if we need it, if it's based on concrete data. I do believe it's understaffed. So the reason it's relevant is just determining this is relevant to the entire rest of the discussion, is I'm trying to get an idea of funding sources, should we need them. So do you have anything else to add on this?
Well, I have a lot to add, but
on this particular topic.
You know, I think I wouldn't see those potential employees as an easy out for a funding source. I think that's something that would result in having to come back and ask for additional supplement anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to emphasize the importance of all this, but anyway, that's all I have to say on it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, so now we're going to vote on the substitute motion.
One more time, please.
I'm sorry,
Scott.
Mr. Chairman, but Alderman Roberts made the sub. Should we give him an opportunity to come back?
Yes.
Since he made
Fair
the
enough.
substitute motion.
I did not
just-
notice that he was gone.
Yeah, he walked out.
Do we think he left for the evening? Okay. Stand by, we'll wait for Alderman Lorenzi's return.
Sorry, in case he had to excuse himself for a personal reason, I just wanted to give him an opportunity to be back in here.
Fair enough. In the meantime, should I read the substitute motion? Is everybody clear? Okay. Just to double check. I got this memorized by now. The substitute motion on the floor, okay, is to cut $36,100 from the performing arts budget, as well as $3,900 from the Cornerstone Rescue Mission budget for $40,000, which would be given to the RSVP program. That is the motion on the floor as I understand it. And so Alderwoman Modrick, we almost got there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to identify where we're headed. We're getting ready to follow a motion on item 1 of from A to G, and I think we're getting ready to move with wherever we go, but we're going to end up with the same discussion because we have the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't solved our problem. Just putting to alert that wherever we go on the substitute, the current motion, more discussion, new motion, we still have B, C, D, E, F, and G, and anything else that we throw into the pot that we want to pull from other places, and we're still going to have the same funding situation. So the undesignated cash, if I could ask a question on that, I'd like to Pauline.
Okay.
Thank you. So here's where I'd like to hear from you. Undesignated cash is still taxpayer dollars, property taxes, it's still going into our bank accounts. It just hasn't been designated. So at some point, undesignated cash is building and growing, I have to think, if we don't designate it and put it towards something that now takes all our citizens and their dollars and put it towards something that's actually working from within our city. Where's our undesignated cash at today? What's our bank statement on undesignated cash?
If you look at the legal and finance agenda for next week when it comes out, there's actually an attachment on there for the cash balance as of the end of July. And I always have the caveat that it is not 100% accurate because of the fact that I show designated based off of what was included in the 2017 appropriation ordinance, as well as what was carried over in supplemental ordinances, that type of thing. But if you were to look at that, when I pull it up here, if I can find it. Sorry, it's taken me a little bit to. It's actually in the hole about $4.5 million for undesignated cash, which means, so the total cash in the bank, less the reserves amount, less what's been designated thus far, is negative $4,465,925.
So that's, now you said negative, but that's an undesignated amount, so it's sitting,
So basically what that means, by designating and having the reserves and the balance that's actually in our bank account, we've dipped into the reserves.
so undesignated funds of the 4 million is.
Negative 4 million, so that means there's zero undesignated cash right now.
So can you tell me then what the reserve balance is?
The reserve balance for the 2017 budget year is just shy of 8.2 million.
And do we have an appropriated policy of how much we should have in these funds to include undesignated cash or our reserves? And do we need to replace those reserves?
The only thing that's in our ordinance right now is that reserves are set at 15% of total costs, total estimated costs, less capital expenditures. Because obviously if the economy tanks, the first thing that we probably would quit spending on is the capital items within the general fund. So that is where that is set. We do not have a current policy in place. I believe that was touched on by our budget analyst, Matt, and that we don't have a policy now. That's why he drafted one as far as replenishing. But yes, we definitely should replenish it. So at the end of the year, we need to have at least enough for next year's reserve, which obviously increases with the total expenditures increasing. And then we've estimated it that we would replenish it to that amount plus about 1.4, 1.5 million tops. But we won't know for sure until the end of the year.
The unknown. Thank you.
Alderman Lewis.
Call the question, please.
Okay, we got a substitute motion on the floor. Do I need to repeat it, or does everybody understand? Okay. So, $40,000 to RSVP from $36,100 for Performing Arts Center and $3,900 for Cornerstone Rescue Mission is the motion on the floor. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? No. Motion fails. Now we're going to go to the original motion made by Alderman Nordstrom, and you might need to correct me if I'm wrong, but you would like to fund RSVP for $40,000 with a funding source from the detox program of $102,000 that we do not have to match. However, we have $100,000 that we need for body cams for the police department. Is that? That's it. That's it. Alderman Lewis.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment, or if it's be a substitute motion, not sure, point of clarity from the attorney, but I'd like to change the funding source to undesignated cash at this time until we can identify another source. Second. Okay, you'll accept that.
Got a second from Nordstrom? So as it stands right now, $40,000 to the RSVP program with a funding source from the undesignated cash. Is that motion stated correctly? Thank you, Wade. Okay. No one's in the queue, so we're going to take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Roll call, please.
Nordstrom. Drew. Scott. Roberts. Drury. Lorente. Armstrong. Lewis. Solomon. Modrick. 3-6.
Motion fails, 3-6. Okay. With that, I don't see anything else in the queue on RSVP. We're done. It is, that motion's disposed of.
Yes. Correct. The substitute motion has been disposed of. However, I'm not able to come up with a good funding source, an alternative yet at this time, so let me withdraw this motion, the original motion, to take it out of the...
It was
Yes, it was a friendly amendment.
Yep. Yeah, that was your motion that we amended.
Okay.
It is done. We are moving on to the item B, which is IT live streaming. All right, we have a motion by Lewis and a second by Laurenti in order to approve the mayor's proposal on that. Alderwoman Armstrong, unless you want to keep the floor there. Okay. Alderwoman Modrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have Jim here, Department of IT, and I would like to ask him a question if I could, since he's here.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert, hi.
Hello.
We've had an opportunity to talk to the other departments regarding their budgets and their needs and their requests, and I'd just like to give you an opportunity to speak on behalf of IT, if you could.
Well, pertinent to the motion on the floor, we currently spend $1,500 a month to use a third-party organization called, company called Granicus to stream the council meetings to the internet. They produce numbers that give an indication that we are currently spending about $4 per view, or $8 if you take out the views that are done by the city employees to produce that live stream. So when the mayor came forward and asked for reductions to our budget, that seemed like one that was not being used a great deal by the public. And I actually believe those Granicus numbers are inflated because of the way they fall within the distribution. Doesn't make sense. So if this is removed from our budget, what we will do is we will look for an alternative, probably leaning towards YouTube. So it's not to say that the live streaming of the council meetings will go away. It may not be the same form, but we will try to keep that service for the public as much as possible. In terms of my general budget, IT as a rule is pretty straightforward. We identify what we need several years out based on things like licensing agreements and storage growth for the city. We currently store terabytes of storage of data, so we have to stay on top of that. So I don't feel that I have any additions to the budget right now. So.
Thank you. So in the for those that, the mayor likes to say the four of us that are watching the live streams when we're not at a meeting, then in the meantime, before you are able to find another source or YouTube, does that mean that they will still have the government access channel and just see recorded sessions? So it's not like we still don't have our open meetings out there to the public. Is that correct?
The access channel is actually taken care of through a completely separate system. It's two separate feeds. This would solely be the live stream that this funding would cut. And then if we were not able to quickly, but I think we're pretty close to identifying a way to actually just keep the live stream going as of January of next year. We'll just have to put stuff up on the website directing people towards it. And we'll actually be able, if it's on YouTube, to link it directly into the website. The one thing we might lose is we would lose in Granicus, you can click on a particular item.
Love that.
But we will not be able to do that with YouTube.
Well, I appreciate you being able to give us that department report on IT, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Happy for Facebook Live and free things out there already. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Jim, just for clarification on this, because the mayor did indicate that when you're saying live streaming, that is being able to stream the meetings as they are occurring.
That is correct.
If that goes away, this $15,000 or whatever goes away, you're still proposing that Granicus would be available for the recording, that we could go back, see?
No, we would we own that data. We would upload that to YouTube, and then YouTube, if that's the chosen one, or Twitch, or any of the other media servers out there, that would be the repository then. So we would not lose the ability to get the archives. It would just not be on Granicus. In order to stay with Granicus, we have to pay them $1,500 every month for perpetuity.
So at this time, if this is removed from the mayor's budget and there isn't an alternative source, you don't know what the cost would be to provide the viewing of that data source?
We would look for a free source, whether that is housed internally and streamed internally because of the low demand for the historic ones, or we would just use staff time and maybe hire a temp to upload that to YouTube.
Okay, so as of January 1st, when this budget, if this passes with this cut, and Granicus goes away, period, the streaming of all city meetings as of the first meeting after the 1st of January 2018 would still be available in a reasonable amount of time?
We would stay with Granicus until we had what we would consider, and we'd work with the mayor's office on this, a reasonable amount. To be honest, if you look at a 3-year history, we don't see people looking more than 4 years back. So if we would never cut Granicus until we had that, and then it would just be an ongoing process to bring those up, which we would see completing in a month or two. It's just the moving that much data. There's almost 750 gig of meetings that we would have to move. Moving that much data would take time. So we would make sure that what we needed was available. And right now, the data shows that the need is actually 1 year, but we would go 4. So.
All right. So I just wanted that clarification because what the mayor presented, because as Lisa, Alderwoman Modrick and I both admitted, we do technically stream it live, and if we don't see it live, I usually stream it the same day. What I understood the mayor to say when he cut this was that the live streaming was going away, but that we would still be able to go back and stream it after the fact.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that is true. It will not be through Granicus, but that is true. The
right.
IT department will not let that go away.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. So the motion on the floor is to approve the mayor's proposal of cutting this program. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Now going to the Crossing Guard program. As the mayor stated, this will be transferred to the Rapid City area schools. They will actually start managing this program, so it'll still go. All right. Motion on the floor is to approve the mayor's proposal. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next up, item D, the Journey Museum. The mayor has proposed a $30,000 reduction in their budget for the 2018 year. We'll start off with Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to reinstate the $30,000. And the designated funding sources, just for discussion purposes, is $10,000 from Water Department, $10,000 from Water Rec, and $10,000 from Solid Waste. That should equal up to $30,000.
Okay. So the motion, do you have a second? Alderwoman Drew has seconded, so the motion on the floor, and we'll, just for the statement, make sure I have it right. $30,000 to the Journey Museum, with $10,000 coming from the Water Department, $10,000 coming from Water Reclamation, $10,000 coming from Solid Waste. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Did you wish to retain the floor or move on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was reviewing the statement that was put together by the mayor, and actually I am not going to go through point by point on everything that was stated in the comments by the mayor. In general, what I'm going to say is most of these talking points are from the last decade, prior to Troy coming on board. There's a couple of discrepancies, though, as far as what's pointed out in the Rapid City Journal. Basically, my major concern is two things regarding the Rapid City Journal, is that the article didn't state quite correctly what was stated by Mr. Kilpatrick. So my next concern is that it's starting to appear that we're negotiating through the newspaper or the news media rather than being able to talk to each other. That's my major concern. That's the bottom line. Because essentially what the Journey Museum is telling me is that it was a total surprise to them. They were not aware of the $30,000 cut coming towards their direction. The other point is that since Troy has taken over, Mr. Kilpatrick's taken over the Journey Museum as executive director, I remember him being admonished for spending so much money into the marketing. And then the next time around, he decided to cut back on his marketing funds. And he's been doing that over time. The next thing is that it seems to be a double standard for the Journey Museum, and I'll pick on the Humane Society, for example. We were given direction to the Humane Society to come up with certain things that they needed to do before we could put them into compliance or agree to their requests. The Journey Museum has done everything that we've asked of them. The things that we cannot do right off the bat is come up with funding to change the name, because that involves branding. Relocating is another issue. Another source of funding has to be designed for that. And where that's going to come from, don't know. So they've done everything, as far as I'm concerned. Those two major items are good examples of what they're not able to do by our requests. Change the name, change location. And a lot of these comments were coming from the previous decade. So therefore, I'm requesting that the City Council look at reinstating the $30,000.
Okay, thank you, sir. Alderman Lewis, you have the floor.
If I might add a friendly amendment to the motion to make it undesignated cash as the funding source. Would you accept that, Mr. Motion Maker?
Mr. Nordstrom, Alderman Lewis is asking.
Or I'll make that a substitute motion, whichever.
All right, so he's
I
asking
would recommend doing the substitute motion.
All right, he prefers a substitute motion. Do you
I'll
wanna
make a
that?
substitute motion to restore the funding of $30,000 with the source being undesignated cash at this point.
Second, motion made by Lewis, second by Armstrong to
Obtain the floor
fund the Journey Museum of their $30,000 from undesignated cash, and Alderman Lewis retains the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor, God, that's not a Freudian slip.
Really
I
good.
wouldn't wish that
It's
in
right
Rapid
there.
City. So getting back to my point here, I'm not going to make a lot more point. I've already made the point of trying to keep the arts alive in Rapid City. I know this is a lot of money we do give them, and I do appreciate what the mayor's doing. But I think they're starting to get off their feet and do some things themselves and go in the right direction. There's arguable whether or not they're in the black. They're in the black from where they've been, but they still are moving forward, and I don't want to cut them off at the feet yet. Maybe keep the momentum going, as my esteemed colleague just mentioned here. And so that's my point of continuing with this, and I don't think we're making the cuts in the places that really count the most for the community in this point. So I would like to keep the journey going. Thank you.
Go to Alderwoman Drew.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I do think the journey is going in the right direction, and to pull the rug out from under them and their efforts at this point, I think is just bad business. You know, we've been waiting for someone to come along and really lead this organization, and Troy Kilpatrick has done that. Their board has done that. They're putting them into the black. This is what we've waited for, so let's not put an end to that and just say, let's take $30,000 away from them. Not only that, this museum houses our collections as a city. These are the Sioux Indian artifacts that are, they're coveted around the world, and we have them here in Rapid City. We have to honor that. The Pioneer Museum, it's all the collections, and maybe we don't really appreciate it now, but we need to keep it for people, generations yet to come. It's our responsibility. And part of the Geological Museum, all those things that have been brought together in that one building, it's our responsibility to keep those collections for future generations. And I think $30,000 is a small price to pay for what they're doing for us, and they're going and leading us in the right direction. I was there last week, and the place was full of kids. It was amazing to see. So the board and this leadership team is really going in the right direction with the journey, making it what it was to become. It was going to be the jewel of our collections. It was going to be a place where people could celebrate history, and that's what it's doing now. So I'm not going to vote in favor of cutting these funds. I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Modrick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I bring Mr. Patrick up?
Absolutely, if he's willing,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Kilpatrick.
Or I'll come to you.
If you'll identify yourself at the podium for the viewing audience, please.
Good evening. I'm Troy Kilpatrick, the Executive Director for the Journey Museum and Learning Center. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I brought you up as I've been bringing up the others because I think it's important that our executive directors of these funding organizations have an opportunity to speak. And I know you've had great news of 2017 and its momentum. Much was stated already by the council up here, including from the previous conversations. And so I want you to have an opportunity to speak to us because, again, our education is limited and our knowledge is as well, and you provide that. So can you share the journey with us?
I'll try. How's that sound? There's so much I could touch on, and you guys have brought many different perspectives as I've sit and listened to the conversations that have happened here over the last few nights. I'd like to just touch on a couple major themes. And that is, you know, a museum and what we can add to the quality of a city and the community itself. That's something that we are totally dedicated to, and it's something that we talk about every day with all of our guests in the community. And Learning Center has been a key to us enhancing the brand of the Journey. It's been a key to our growth. It's been a key to attendance numbers going up. A year ago, we grew by 9% in overall attendance. This year, we're up by 10% over last year, okay? Our memberships have grown in the last 24 months from 461 to 705. Those are phenomenal percentages. Are they enough? It's not enough. It's never going to be enough. We have a big community. We have a lot of people to serve. And the board, they push me. They push me to reach more audience. That's one of the things that we're doing. That's why we continue to innovate, and that's why we continue to teach and add other programs. They also asked me to cover our costs, and we did cover costs. Yes, we used the city's $331,500 to help cover the costs. Thank you. We appreciate that. And what does a reduction of $30,000 do? Well, we covered our costs by about $12,000 last year. So now instead of us talking about a fiscally strong position, now we have a negative position. We're up covering our costs this year close to $24,000. Again, that feels a lot different than if you reverse that position. Lastly, as we talk about all the things here, I've heard people talk about how to grow or nurture business. We're hiring more people because we have to support our educational programming, as an example. Our payroll is up. Our revenues for paid admissions are up. There are dollars and cents coming into the city that are supporting all of us because the museum's healthier. A healthy Journey Museum and Learning Center makes for a healthy and vibrant Rapid City. I hope I can count on all of your support.
Are you done? Alderman Lorenzi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. All of us have seen the mayor's presentation on this particular item and his comments there. And it is true, the Journey has never been financially independent. And that if you all remember, because we're very selective about what we believe the taxpayers want and very selective about what we think brings quality to their lives, but I'll guarantee you this much, that if all of these items were on a ballot to be cut, I think you all know where that vote would go. I'm pretty sure of it. I'm pretty sure of it, knowing that $330,000 prior to this budget year was going to the Journey, and still $301,500 is going to the Journey in this budget. So, I mean, we have to, as you all know, and I couldn't believe the substitute motion because we just heard the finance officer tell us that undesignated cash is basically sitting in the negative. And here we are still trying to define that as a source of funding. I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, did we just not hear the very person who knows the financial position of this city say that those funds are in the negative, and yet we're going to identify that as a funding source. Government at work. I love that. I don't love that. That was a very facetious remark. I don't want anybody to take that as serious. The reality is that we need to get through these cuts. We need to do what's right. I don't think there's anything else to talk about. I hope somebody calls the question. I think we all know where we all stand. Let's bring this to a vote.
If I may ask a question regarding undesignated cash, because this is a hot topic and it's being used here as a funding source. Tracy, you're the lucky one to take my question. Will you educate us and the public, for one, briefly tell us what the undesignated cash is? I understand what it is, but tell us what that funds is for. And in terms of accounting standards, is it generally, is the practice fine to use? Is it not fine? I mean, I know there's different kinds of accounting standards, so I just want to know. Here comes Pauline too, and she's going, boss, please hurry up. I don't want to. No. So Pauline, what I'm asking is, give us a quick description of undesignated cash for us and the public. And two, in terms of accounting standards, is it okay to use that to balance your budget? Because the mayor, regardless of what we're doing here, we're talking about a certain amount of money here, but we have $1.3 million from the mayor to balance the budget with undesignated cash, which is the biggest issue. Is I'm trying to get to the principle of the thing. Is it in bad practice? Is it an accepted practice? And just kind of educate us a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. So undesignated cash, in its definition, is cash that's in your bank account that is not either reserved or designated for something else. As I mentioned earlier, we have a reserve amount by ordinance of 15%, basically, of our general fund expenditures. And then designated, we either designate through the supplemental appropriation process, or if a new project comes in that hadn't been budgeted at all, that's typically where the funding would come from if there's money in the bank. Sorry, catching my breath. I heard that and I was trying to hurry in. So it is not against the rules to use undesignated cash to help balance the budget. In South Dakota, we are allowed to use cash as an offset if you do not expect your revenues to match your expenditures in the budget. This is one-time money. If we do dip into it, typically, is how we've always looked at it. But we've also always had, we're at the end of the year, where departments end up not spending some money, whether they had vacancies during the year, so they didn't spend all the money budgeted for wages. The piece of equipment we budgeted for came in lower than expected, that type of thing. And so we typically have not dipped into that very frequently. That being said, as our budgets get tighter, what's not spent is getting smaller and smaller every year. And so much like a reserve policy, if you dip into it, it's one of those, the other term for this is undesignated fund balance. And so I did send out a survey type thing for other first-class municipalities. Who uses it? Do you have a policy? Do you not? GFOA does recommend best practices to have a policy in place, which we really do not have a policy other than general guidance. It's not written. And then some of them use anywhere from nothing to balance their budgets. And I want to say, and that was Watertown, they had a very strict thing where they did not use it to balance the budget. If they did want to use it to balance the budget, it had to be very specific for a one-time purchase and also how it was going to be replenished. If you give me a second, I can tell you what Sioux Falls does. They do use money to balance their budget. Looking at Aberdeen, they're proposing a policy where their undesignated cash is anywhere from 10 to 25% of their revenues, and they are using like 1 to 2% to balance their budget typically. Hang on a second. Well, I looked that up. But so it's one of those that, honestly, when I first started for the city of Rapid City, we were using over $4 million to balance our budget as far as budgeting is concerned. But at that time, we were getting 10 to 12% back in unspent budget authority. So it was safe at the time to do so. When the economy started declining and our budgets got tighter, that's when we started trying to lower it. It did go up again to 3 million about last year. Why am I not finding this? Because you're all waiting on me, that's why. So. Sorry, I apologize.
It's on the spot. It's understandable.
So Sioux Falls actually has in their charter that for any fund, the total proposed expenditures shall not exceed the total of estimated income plus the fund balance carry forward, exclusive of reserves. So where I say it's not wrong, they actually have it in their charter that says that they can do it. And they look to have a 25% general fund reserve at the end of the year, where we're looking at just a 15% reserve. He didn't indicate if they had anything that they were using for their budget currently, though. So I apologize for that. But so it really is a philosophy question and what each municipality wants to do. I know when I was in Sturgis, we used it, and when Faye responded, they are using some. The 1% to 2% generally is what she said. So
the reason this comes up is because we're talking about using undesignated cash as a funding source. What I'm trying to find out is that responsible or irresponsible. And you're saying it depends on philosophical nature. That means people voted for us and it's kind of up to us to decide, and that accounting standards don't really care, it sounds like.
Correct. In South Dakota, they don't. We're allowed to use cash as to balance the budget. Some states we're not allowed to it.
When's the last time we did not use undesignated cash to balance the budget?
I want to say.
Has it been a while?
Like 2010 or. Okay. I could probably look at that real quick too.
I just wanted to kind of get a general feel. If you're saying 2010, that's close enough for me. Why that matters is because one thing I caught from that is it's a good thing to use for one-time purchases. And I remember Alderman Lorenzi saying that'd be a great thing for body cams or whatever the case may be. It also might be a good thing for non-public safety community investments. And the 1.3 million that the mayor's proposing is about that amount of what we're asking for in these community investments. Minus the contracts we have with the county where we have to match 50-50 and those sorts of things. So it's kind of a matter of putting this over here to justify that that's a one-time expense versus an operational expense. So the reason I just bring this up is to find out how we should use undesignated cash, if there's an accounting standard, if we're the only city in the country that does it, but apparently it's a very, very common practice, but what is the wise thing for us to do? And I think it should have a leash on it too. So it's up to us to determine what that leash is. But thank you for answering that question.
Correct.
Alderwoman Drury, you're in the queue. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask the mayor a question?
Absolutely.
Mayor, going back to the proposal that you gave with the Journey, had there been some negotiations or some talks with the Journey along the way about cuts being made or things they could do to improve or steps for improvement? I think when they have other programs that are failing, there's kind of steps for improvement set out. Was there anything like that took place?
Well, in preparation for this 2018 budget, I did not sit down with them and negotiate on the amount of money that I was going to propose. But starting 2 years ago, I met with the executive director. Shortly after, I met with the board. I had a number of conversations with them where I expressed all of my concerns. And that's why we're here today. But there's something we agree on, and that's the Rapid City community does not support its museum. That was one of Mr. Kilpatrick's statements to me. I think that's true also. So There's that, there's the tourism, there's the location. I went to them and said, how can I help you move? What could be a better location? How, I'm willing to do anything. And I was assured that this was the right location. They're very comfortable in the location. And the common theme, and one that I happen to believe, is that the Journey Museum was a great idea in a terrible location with a ill-conceived report on the financial capability of a museum to survive in that location. So what I ask myself is, if we were hearing a proposal to build this museum today in this location, knowing what we do, how would I feel about it? And I believe how I feel the taxpayers would feel about it would be not to do it. Now, that doesn't mean I hate the museum or anybody there, and I know that this gets taken personally, but this is a part of what is to be a systematic review of all of the city programs, all of the city's spending, with several factors taken into consideration. And the city has identified 1,200 programs for evaluation. The Journey Museum is one of them. So this is a difficult decision, and I never intended to call them out publicly and point fingers at them or anything like that. But I think the model is not showing hope after 20 years that it is going to get better without a significant change. So therefore, what is the consequence of just closing your eyes and funding at the same level forever? I don't think it's in anyone's best interest. And of course, as we know, apparently the best way to get someone's attention or to bring an issue to the forefront is to threaten some of the funding. And I didn't do that as a trick or a stunt or any way to embarrass anybody, but I don't believe the funding is justified, taking all things into consideration. And this may create a sink or swim scenario. But the evaluation of the worth to the community is something that is non-scientific. It is highly subjective, and my opinion of all that's reflected in the budget proposal.
Are you done? Okay, thank you. Mr. Nordstrom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kirkpatrick, you heard the comments from the mayor about non-support of the community. Can you share with us a little bit about the percentages increases since you've taken over? I know that we refer to the 20-year history quite a bit, but since you've taken over, I really appreciate your benchmarks that you've been able to track for us. Could you describe a little bit about the increase in the community support?
Yeah, I'd like to be able to talk about that a little bit, and I appreciate the mayor's candor. I'll remind everybody here that the conversation occurred over 2 years ago, and I still feel like we could be a bigger part of all the community. Part of that conversation, too, revolved around the part that I think us being in the news in a negative fashion and not having the support of the city helps make community members question whether we should have this facility. Okay? And since those conversations, we've continued, in spite of whatever might be going on publicly, to build programming. And so one of the things that Mr. Nordstrom talked about is we've been measuring since 2014 12 different categories that we call benchmarks, of which 7 of those are in audience development. And we've continued to grow in all of these categories methodically over the course of the past 24 months. I touched on our overall attendance numbers going up from 2015 to 2016 at 9%. That's a great number. I don't know if businesses budget to grow by 9% typically. I'll remind all of you who have some business processes here. Our memberships have grown to a tune of 30% and up 18%. That means people are becoming members and renewing their memberships over the course of the past 24 months. So that must mean that there are people in the community who are finding value in what we're doing. We know in our educational numbers, and those are our people who are here in the community, that they're absolutely exploding. Our education numbers were up 45% year to date and on track. And as one of the comments up there was, our summer camps are a perfect example of family members taking advantage of the museum. We had 3 camps last summer. This year we had to double and do 6. Last Friday in the museum, we had 30 kids there for Journey into Space Camp. We had 40 homeschool kids come for a solar eclipse program. We had 162 people there that evening in the theater for the solar eclipse program, and we had another 100 guests come through the museum. That doesn't solve all of the problems, but it certainly does point to the fact that there's some good things going on here. And so I will probably never be satisfied with whether enough members in this community are using this museum. I can always be quoted as saying that, okay? But we will work hard to make sure that we're developing the type of programming that will engage more community members in coming to the museum. And that's what I hope to impress upon all of you as decision makers here tonight as you look at what are the right decisions for 2018, 2019, and beyond. What do we want to be invested in? So I'm posing this to you, and I'm committing to all of you, our board has committed, that we will continue to serve this community and be here for all ages and all families. Thank you for listening.
One more question, if I may, Mr. Kilpatrick. You've heard the mayor comment about what can the city do to help you, the Journey Museum and Learning Center, relocate or change the brand or the name. What can you bring to the table if the mayor is making that proposal, or did you refuse that?
Well, given the conversation we're having about $30,000 right now, it would be hard for me to embrace the idea that we're going to spend millions of dollars to move a museum when in fact I actually think it's in a very good place. If you do some research on museums, and I did when I took over as the executive director, most museums are towards city centers. It's so they're accessible from all areas fairly equally. So I don't believe it was built in the wrong place, but I believe it was a fun topic for everybody to beat up in 1997 and 98 and 2000. And as we went through this, perhaps it was too good of an excuse to not hold ourselves accountable for doing a better job of teaching and being a part of the community. But one of the things that we've done since I've come on board is we've held ourselves accountable. And the first thing you do is you don't make excuses about things like that. You accept what you have, and you're thankful for what you have. You talk about what you have, and you build on that. And that's what we've done. So I'm not asking for new buildings, but I am asking for $30,000 to keep the momentum going, because one thing that this council should be aware of is the building is 20 years old, and there's a lot of stuff that's 20 years old. So Mr. Allender is correct in assessing that there's some needs here. There are. I'm not asking for you guys to even consider reducing your support for us down the road. I am asking you to be supportive of us today and in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll yield.
Okay, Alderman Lorenzi.
Call the question.
Yep. The question is, we have a substitute motion on the floor from Alderman Lewis to support the Journey Museum with $30,000 using undesignated cash as a funding source. And with that, that is the motion on the floor, and nobody's in the queue to talk, so we'll take a vote. All those in favor of this motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Sounds like the motion passes to me. Okay. Do you want a roll call? Okay. Let's roll call down the line and make it easier.
Drew. Scott. Drury. Lorente. Armstrong. Lewis. Solomon. Modrick. Nordstrom. Can't count tonight. 6-3.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Troy. You can have a seat. Next, we're going to the Human Services Community Investments. The mayor has proposed a cut of $52,000. Moved, motion by Lewis, a second. Second by Armstrong. Ms. Modrick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, this is a lump sum, Human Services Community Investments, so I'd like to direct a question. I'll direct it to the mayor since it's got a cut sitting on here. If he could share with the public what Human Services Community Investments is and where the funding is, the breakdown, and why we have a request from you to reduce it by $52,000, if you could for me. Thank you.
In the Rapid City subsidies, there's two categories that somehow arrived at $102,000 each. One was for the Allied Arts, and one was for community investment, human services. And those were a hodgepodge of awards given over time to various human services agencies that would apply. And the award may be as low as several $100s or $1,000 up to tens of thousands of dollars. It's been my experience and more learning through the collective impact process that many, many small awards are less helpful than few more substantial awards. So I've aligned our subsidies to reflect more the needs of our community, the needs of surrounding workforce development, and therefore we have a substantial award to Early Childhood Connections for early childhood development of $50,000. That was new last year, and that's again requested in 18. Last year was the first substantial award to the Cornerstone Rescue Mission, and I know it's been controversial. This year I reduced that a little bit to because I reduced a lot of things this year to try to make the budget balance, but that is a meaningful award to the largest human services provider in Rapid City. And I also look at this in terms of if this agency or the organization was not to perform the service they are performing, would the City of Rapid City be obligated to take on this service? So, for example, if the Cornerstone Rescue Mission were to close and we have 100 people walking the streets, some emergency measure would have to be taken, or if it's in the winter, watch 100 people freeze to death. So, I mean, there are those things. The same logic is used on the Working Against Violence Incorporated. That is a subsidy that is in lieu of having to provide those type of services. So, I have taken a substantial chunk away from this Human Services Award Fund to discourage and maybe start to wean off this $102,000 completely and put it into a smaller number of agencies that we direct funds to, but that have more impact and will help us reach our desired results.
So if I can still ask another question, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mayor, one of the parts that makes this, I guess I have to ask you, why is it umbrellaed with the powerful name and all the powerful works that are being done under that name, and now reducing by $52,000 from 102, because it's not line item like the other notable budget cuts are for all the other entities, it really doesn't reach out to the public and let them know that this is a good cut or a bad cut to Wavy or to Cornerstone or any others. So I know we may not be getting public input because it's got a name that doesn't really infuse what it's truly doing. So when you're saying you want to cut this down to nothing, really, again, I think we might want to strategically look at this as a plan, because those entities are very valuable to the community and a huge resource. And I'm not quite sure if the public knows that $52,000 out of 102 is being sliced off of the top of these human resources that we're providing for. I just need to understand, is that going to come to us next year, a dissolve or an eliminate like we had this year?
This is very much part of a strategic plan.
Okay.
With our 2-year involvement in collective impact, with our greater understanding of human services and how it works and what doesn't work. And in my mind, this is one of those categories that we take down chunk by chunk until we are not giving out $800 rewards or awards, that we are funneling that money into organizations that can reach a substantial number of our citizens. And yes, that is at the expense of the small nonprofit who is scraping by on a few $1,000s a year. There's no question about that. But overall, that small nonprofit is not helping us get to our goals. It's not helping to provide service to the greater community, and I think that's where our responsibility lies.
I like to hope that every little bit counts. Just sometimes the smallest things make the biggest differences. Do you see this name changing to Rapid City Collective Impact?
No.
Do you see a funding source developed for Rapid City Collective Impact that we would be working on as a budget in 2018 or 19?
I don't know. I can't answer that. That's not apparently on our minds at this moment.
At this moment. All right, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Laurenti, almost got through. Okay, the motion on the floor, as I understand it, is to approve the mayor's proposed reduction of $52,000 on the Human Services Community Investments. So all in favor, say aye. All opposed?
No.
1 no from Lisa Modrick. Next, we are moving on to the Allied Arts program. Mayor's proposed a $27,000 reduction in their funding for the next year. And anybody wish to begin the discussion or make a motion? Alderman Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to restore the funding via undesignated cash as well.
The motion on the floor is to fund that $27,000 out of undesignated cash.
I don't think I need to keep beating the dead horse about the arts being for the community, good for the community. So,
yes, we did have good, substantial discussion on that. Alderwoman Modrick, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, just so the public knows, we had a large reach by our public, by our citizens, that stated how important the arts and the allied arts are as well. And we got a lot of educational information. I hope everybody had a chance to read that, because it really shows where the numbers are, where they count, and how they're being distributed, and how they help so many other organizations umbrellaed under that. And they are valuable to this community. I think there's over 16, and we have a few members in the audience I know that are benefactors of Allied Arts, as well as a representative. And maybe I could start with the Allied Arts representative. Gigi's out, but would you mind coming up and giving us a little piece of platform on Allied Arts and the saving of it?
Okay, would you please identify yourself for the viewing audience, please?
My name is Joe Doyle. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Allied Arts, and Gigi, our executive director, is out of the country right now. So I'm here instead, and I'll do the best I can for you. The Allied Arts was created by the city to disperse money to arts organizations, and 4 of those were initially through city ordinance, and that ordinance is still in place. And we've expanded that to 16 organizations that we're currently giving money to. And those organizations are doing a lot in the community here. In fact, we had over 1,300 events through those organizations in 2016, and that equated to over 500,000 attendees. Over 600 events for children. That includes art education for children at various venues and things like that. Of our attendees, we've had over 150,000 of them are tourists, and so these arts events that I can name here are really supporting our sales tax and tourism tax income levels. And I think overall what a long-winded explanation could do, I could just jump to, is we're an economic engine for Rapid City. Rapid City's arts culture is thriving, and that's a good thing. That's something that just this spring, the mayor and the city council showed their support for when they adopted the cultural plan into the Rapid City Comprehensive Plan. I think we all know that it's important, and to begin chipping away at it now is to undercut the plans that we just have put in place.
All right. Alderman, am I hearing a call?
I have questions for
Alderwoman Drew.
Okay. Thank you. What was your name again?
Joe Doyle.
Joe Doyle. Okay, so Joe, the city gives you guys $102,000 a year in subsidy, right?
That's right.
I was looking at your website today, and I saw absolutely no thanks, no recognition, nothing that says that that money comes from the city. And I think something that you guys might want to really take to heart is that this city does support the arts and should get some credit for the amount that we do give as far as the arts subsidy. So you might want to look at that. Now, as I understand it, you raised $148,000 above and beyond that. Is that correct?
I think I have a similar number. I don't know these off the cuff. I just volunteer on the board, but I think I have that information for you. I want to say it was 150-something thousand, but close to that range.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
around there. And that your administrative costs are around $96,000, leaving you with about $49,000 to actually give in grants that you've raised. So I do have concerns about the amount of you're spending on admin. So I don't have any problem with the city subsidy. I'd like to see that keep in place. I just don't know if I can really support continuing to give it to the Allied Arts to distribute. I think you should be doing a lot more fundraising for the organizations that you support. They need the money, and they're looking to you to do that because they're too small to hire staff that, would go out and be fundraisers. And I don't mean to be too hard on you, but I do come from an arts background, and I know that this is a generous community. So at this point, I can...
Was that a question directed to me, or were you
It's a
just
comment. It's a comment. And so for now, that's the figures I've got. Okay, and okay. So just think about that as you guys are going forward next year. I'm not going to vote to cut the $27,000, but you might not be the engine that I'm looking at to be distributing this fund in the future. So I just want you to be aware of that. Thank you.
Okay, we're done. You can have a seat if you don't mind, and nobody else is in the queue, so we're going to take a vote. The motion on the floor is to fund the Allied Arts $27,000 out of undesignated cash. The motion was made by Lewis, and the second, I believe, was Armstrong. So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Okay, we're going to need a roll call, please.
Scott. No. Robert. Excuse me. Drury. No. Laurenti. No. Armstrong. Yes. Lewis. Yes. Solomon.
Yes.
Modrick. Yes. Nordstrom. Yes. Drew. Yes. Again, 6-3.
Thank you. Council's okay. We're getting close here. The mayor has proposed balancing of the senior citizen centers to evenly distribute the funding to them, $17,750 each, to Minna-Luzahan Senior Citizen Center and Kenya Lake Senior Citizen Center.
I move to approve as presented.
Let's go to the queue here. Sorry. Well, we have we have a motion by Modrick to approve and a second by Armstrong. Okay. Laurenti, you have the floor, sir.
I'm going to take a stab at it. I'm going to make a substitute motion to revert the funding to its previous levels.
Motion on the floor is to revert funding to previous levels. Does he have a second? Motion fails. Original motion on the floor to approve the mayor's proposal of balance on these items? Nobody's in the queue. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
Mr.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Could I just make a statement?
Yes.
Now that this is substantially over, I just want to reiterate that we're starting a priority-based budget system, which I've said over and over is not a gimmick. It is not meant to look good but be the same as usual. Just so happens that some of the subsidy items were easier to define and score and understand the value of. This is a system that is being used by more and more communities nationwide, and here's the concept that I want to leave everyone with tonight. You want more money for roads. Well, I can tell you where to find it, and it's not just on the backs of the arts or museums or anything like that, but as the year goes on and we continue to identify city programs that the funding should be reverted either from the current program to a higher level program or should be done away with altogether. The money for the millions of dollars for your roads are in $20,000 and $40,000 and $60,000 pockets all over this city. And in each one of those requests for redistribution or ending funding, someone is going to feel badly about it, and someone may even lobby council members or the press about it. So it is not meant to be a pretty system where everyone feels good. It is meant to make the most out of the money that we already have. And also the theme here, and you guys are reiterating through your comments, you're practically saying it word for word like I said it during my presentation. What we need here is longer-term stability in this budget, which requires looking at all different aspects of it, revenue and spending and long-term plans as well as short-term plans. So I just wanted to say that and say that the arts, I really think what would be appropriate, rather than taking on arts funding on an individual basis and evaluating the individuals or organizations, I think that it would be wise, just a suggestion, for the council to say, we believe in public funding of the arts at X% of the city budget. Because currently in the general fund budget, we are spending just over 1% of all general fund dollars directly to the arts. I think that's respectable. I don't think there's anything to be embarrassed about. I don't think declining that by my proposed amounts would have changed us from being an art-friendly community to an art-hating community. But I think that that's really a philosophical thing that should be addressed. If we're going to fund the arts, let's attach a percentage there. That way, over time, over 10, 20 years, when the general fund budget's going up, so will that percentage. That's just a suggestion, and I just wanted to get that out. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We do have an item on discussion of vision funds. From what I understand, we discussed this when we talked about the sales tax distribution. But does anybody disagree with that, or can we move forward to public comment? We have a few. If that's the case, we're moving on. We're getting close. We're into public comment now. We have a few public comment forms. Alderwoman Scott, before we head there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm just kind of questioning because we're already 15 minutes over our 2 hours that was originally scheduled for this, and there's still a public comment, and then there is still some other considerations that have been requested along the way that still need motions on or to dismiss. So are we going to sit here tonight and try to take care of the rest of this, or are we going to do public comment and move to another meeting? What are we doing?
I would like to leave that up to the council if you would like to continue, or if you would like to get through. Do you want to stop now or get through public comment? We have to have public comment before we do a reading regardless. So I would leave that up to the council. So Alderwoman Modrick's calling a point of order on the discussion of vision funds. We have not on the agenda, which we haven't done anything on.
No, it's next year.
Yeah. Yes, that's what I said. Did you have anything to add to that discussion? Okay.
And I'm sorry, I would like a vote whether we're going to continue or if before we go on to item number 3.
Yeah.
We're 17 minutes past a 2-hour that was scheduled for this. Are we going to try to work through this tonight? Because based on the notes that I've taken over the last 4 days, there's like 5 items that were brought to our attention for funding consideration. So besides anything else any other council member wants to talk about. So are we going to continue tonight, or are we going to call this and call for another meeting?
Yes, so what we're going to do is take a vote of the council to see if you want to end here, or if you want to continue on. And the natural stopping point would be before public comment here, because we have a reading, but if you want to get to a first reading of some sort, we would continue on. So the question on the floor, as I understand it, is do we want to continue or do we want to adjourn? Pauline?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know it's past the 2-hour deadline, but I would really appreciate a first reading opportunity, even if we continue the discussion of the 2018 funds to another night. The reason I say that is I need 7 days between first and second reading, and looking at those that have responded to the doodle poll as far as when our next meeting can be held, it's looking like before the next council meeting, and so then that pushes us to the end of September, and quite honestly, that makes me a little bit nervous.
Okay. Let's vote on whether we should continue, and then we'll take your comments. Okay, I think that's appropriate. So all those in favor of continuing this discussion to at least get a vote of the first reading, to continue tonight in order to get to perhaps a vote of the first reading, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Here.
We have 1 no from Alderwoman Scott. He's tired. I understand. It has been long, and I do appreciate the council. This is the 4th hearing, multiple hours of work, doing the people's business. With that, the next item on here, excuse me, I was looking at the wrong agenda, is regarding the discussion of the 2016 vision funds. The 2018 vision funds. Is the folks in the queue, is this what you're coming on? All right. Alderman Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to see if I can get my fellow council members to, since this isn't really budgetary, it's a different fund, if we could possibly move past this for tonight and then get to the first reading and get this in the records. I'd really appreciate that if we could just move on to the public comment. I think most of the public comment has already been covered by the discussion we had earlier, and then we've already approved everything that, or disapproved whichever the public comment was regarding. So if we could just move on to keep this vision fund discussion for a later time, since it's a separate committee anyway, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Alderwoman Modrick.
Thank you. So I guess point of order on the agenda. So you're asking Councilman Lewis to move discussion to another time or off the agenda?
Well, we meet as this vision committee is a different entity when we do that. We're not technically the city council at that time, if I'm correct, and so we won't have to discuss it now. Is kind of a redundancy. We're going to have a discussion about it anyway, eventually. But right now, this doesn't affect our budget, and we're trying to get the budget done, get the first reading done. That's my biggest concern with doing it at this point is.
I think what I'd like to do, if I could, is just acknowledge that we've got people in the audience, I think, that have been waiting to see which direction the council is going on the vision funds, because there is an interest by the community. This is the public fund. It is funds that have been voted in and requested by the citizens of Rapid City to use for vision projects in our future, and I think it is important to it should be important to the entire city. They haven't recalled it because they know it's important. So if we are not going to have discussion on vision funds, then would it be appropriate to have those that are here, since they've been waiting through this process, to speak on vision funds?
You're more than welcome to call, if you have a particular person in mind right now as we're discussing it.
Okay.
We can briefly get
Do you have
to
any
it.
comments on vision funds? Just one? Okay. Well, since we're going to possibly move this off of agenda, may I bring up the person that would like to speak? Can you tell me who it is?
I'm not sure.
Oh,
you
we don't
said
have any?
You're the one who mentioned that we might have people in the audience.
Right, but I
we
thought
do
you
have
had a
public,
speaker.
but I don't. We do have one.
Okay, can I move that person in then
Absolutely.
to the queue so that we can speak
We have a
on this?
representative from YFS.
Do you mind if we do that?
Excuse me. Pauline? Public comment.
Okay. So even though We're deferring the vision funds.
The vision fund is within the ordinance, so they're still free to talk about the vision fund during the public comment period, which was what was available anyway.
Okay,
So
thank you.
They're here, ready to go when we get there.
That sounds great. Then I'll look forward to that conversation.
Is anybody in the queue wanting to talk about vision funds? Okay, Alderman Lorenzi.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, I believe we had a motion that we approved on the reallocation. Now, I don't know if this was meant to be some other discussion besides the proposed reallocation, so.
From what I'm aware of, this was lumped into that discussion. It was listed separately, but as part of that discussion, we took it. But if there's other considerations I haven't thought of, I'm more than willing to.
Yeah, I mean, I support moving this forward if we need to, but I thought the whole point of this discussion was all about whether we're going to do the reallocation. And we've already made a motion and approved that to have staff put that together, if I don't remember.
Coming back to us with
yes.
that.
For a vote, and I believe that would be the appropriate time to have that discussion, unless there's some discussion other than that about 2018 vision.
When I are on the same page.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Scott.
I yield.
Thank you. Yeah, the only other thing that I can think of that would have been part of this discussion for the 2018 vision funds is the current ordinance for the vision funds is a separate ordinance. And so does the reallocation affect the current vision fund? Wade, do you happen to know? I do not believe it does, because I believe the funding of the vision fund was not necessarily contained within the ordinance of the vision fund.
There's basically two sections in the code that deal with it. One sets out the base X percentage of the sales tax revenue goes to general fund, utility support fund, and then it's the capital improvements and vision fund are combined. And so then there's another section that deals with how the capital and vision fund is broken into two accounts and how those monies are spent. So there's actually, Pauline and I have been working on a draft that's going to come forward to Legal and Finance next week that's going to address that reallocation.
So that's all part of that whole reallocation draft that so it's not only considering now the CIP policy that the mayor provided a draft of, but also the vision fund ordinance, as well as an ordinance to reallocate the 2 pennies. It's going to wrap up all of that.
Correct.
There we go. Thank you.
Very good. So we will continue that discussion another time when that comes up at the Legal and Finance meeting and beyond. All right. If it pleases the council, I'd like to open it up for public comment. Yes. Okay. We are now into public comment for item number 7. You have 3 minutes to speak each, and I do have 4 request forms. A couple of you may have spoken already, so you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but the first folks I'd like to call up Susan Fidel. She has comments regarding the vision funds. And would you just please identify yourself for the council and audience, please?
My name is Susan Fidel, and I'm the CEO of Youth and Family Services. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to make a couple of comments about how important the vision funds are. Through my work, I have an opportunity to travel around the country, and more than once I have talked with people about how Rapid City does the vision funds, and they hear about what we do, and they think that this is an incredibly wise and generous community to have the vision funds. We all know that it increases the quality of life, and it increases the attractiveness of our community. It also provides opportunities for both the advantaged and the disadvantaged people in our community, which I think is terribly important. In short, I think it makes Rapid City not an ordinary community, but an extraordinary community. And so I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for making sure that the vision funds continue, and say that Youth and Family Services, as well as many, many, many other people, are very grateful. That's all I have.
Thank you. Next up, Kirsten Hollenbeck from the Black Hills. You're good? You like what we talked about tonight? Okay. Moving on to the third speaker request from Joe Doyle. Joe, did you have additional comments you would like to make on behalf of Allied Arts? And just a reminder, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Council President. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you for the direction you went on the decision to keep $27,000 in the arts budget. I had some different words chosen for my 3 minutes, but I feel like real quickly I should correct some information there that Councilwoman Drew had. I have my 2016 990 here from a CPA, and so we raised, including the city money, $253,480, and then we gave back out $140,847, and you'd mentioned $90,000, and if that were the case, I may not even want to donate if we couldn't even give out the same money the city was giving us. But we do take city money, we make 1.5 times that, and then we give as much as we can to the arts organizations. And I think that the arts are a strong foundation for Rapid City. Again, thank you for your support of the arts. I think we're going in the right direction instead of chipping way backwards, as many cities and schools have already started doing. And so thanks again. I won't take any more of your time. I know it's getting late.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. I have a fourth speaker request form from Karen Gunderson Olson, former council member. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Karen Gunderson Olson, and I'm just going to be really brief. I'm just going to say I have heard the mayor offer some really interesting ideas in regards to funding the arts, and I will welcome that discussion, because in 1968, when I moved Rapid City, there wasn't even a public gallery. So those nonprofit organizations have done all kinds of fabulous things for our community. And as this conversation that the mayor is suggesting moves forward, I will certainly be interested in hearing that conversation.
Thank you. If anybody else wishes to speak, otherwise, public comment is closed. Now we're going to the next item, which is a first reading of Ordinance 6194 for fiscal year 2018, appropriation ordinance, which was continued from the August 15, 2017 Special City Council. I'm just reading this all. And continued from the August 18, 2017 Special City Council meeting, and continued from the August 21st, 2017 Special City Council meeting. And with that, we will go to Alderman Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to approve the first reading of the ordinance with the additions of $14,500 going to Pennington County Emergency Management with the source of undesignated cash, $30,000 going back to the Journey Museum from the source of undesignated cash, $27,000 going back to the Allied Arts Fund with the source of undesignated cash, $100,000 going from the body cam program from the release of $102,000 from the detox program, and $9,000 and putting that remaining $2,000 back in undesignated cash, and $9,000 going to from the Civic Center marketing plan going to the Civic. Where's that going to? I'm sorry, I forgot. $9,000 from the Civic Center marketing line item. What was that again? Civic Center $9,000, but the funding source is the marketing line item. It's an internal source, thing. So, thank you.
Motion by Lewis and a second by Nordstrom. Did you wish to add anything else? Okay. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make an amendment and reduce the library fund to its 2017 level, which is a reduction of $60,000 based on the mayor's presentation of 2017 to the 2018. If I can get a second. Okay. I'd like to make a motion for an amendment to the appropriation to reduce the Parks and Rec Department by $268,000 and replenish the undesignated cash by that amount. Thank you. If I may continue with,
second by Drew.
May I continue with the discussion?
Sure.
Thank you. So the reason I'm proposing these is, and thank you for allowing me to at least explain this one. The Parks and Rec Department, what the mayor has proposed is to put the enterprise funds into the Parks and Rec Department. So it makes it look like the Parks and Rec Department increased 23% in their expenses from 2017 to 2018. When you remove the enterprise revenue as well as the expenses, the Parks and Recs Department actually only took a 4% increase. And so I'm recommending removing that $268,000 because the Parks and Rec Rec Department has the most of their part-time, and I'm hoping that they can either, take a look at their programs and see if they can work that around and maybe utilize some more of their full-time people to supplement that. It's just one way. If they had a large increase last year, which when I look at this, from the 2016 to the 2017, and that didn't even take into effect any enterprise funds, the Parks and Rec Department had a 14% increase last year. So if they hold with last year's, they did have a 14% increase in their overall budget from 2016 to 2017. So I'm just asking them to hold and utilize that 14% rather than giving them an additional 4%. So that's one amendment, if we could vote on that.
So the amendment, as I understand it, is to take $268,000 from the Parks and Recreation budget to $268,000. I just want to make sure everybody's clear before we continue the discussion, so we know what we're talking about here. From Parks and Recreation, and putting it into what?
Undesignated cash.
Undesignated cash. So she wants to credit that to undesignated cash from Parks and Rec budget. Okay. Alderman Nordstrom, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be voting against this motion because I've been asking the Parks and Rec Department to come forward with a stronger budget because of their decline over history. Yes, they did, if it is correct on the 14% increase, it's only beginning. They are so far behind on so many projects within the Parks Department that I hate to see that the Parks Department take any more cuts, and they're just starting to make up from, I believe it was the 2009 budget when they had to take a straight across 10% from everybody's budget, but they did not have the opportunity to make up for it. So that's probably another reason why we're seeing the 14% increase in 2017. So I can't support the motion because I know there's so many needs within the department that have to be addressed. Thank you.
We're going to go to Pauline Sumption, who's in the queue. Pauline.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this was included in Ms. Scott's calculations, but we added the cemetery to the general fund in 2017, and so that was a $300,000 increase to the general fund by itself in for total expenditures. So, which that would have been in an enterprise fund prior to that. So, in my mind, if you didn't include that in the 16 and the 17 amounts, that's not quite right. So, just for that clarification, because I honestly don't know what you included.
Okay. Steve Lorenzi, you have the floor, sir.
Okay, Chair. I'm not usually in this particular seat physically. I am, but I'm really, if I may, Alderwoman Scott, if I can ask you a couple of questions about your motion. I just want to be clear. Are we talking about the proposal to move the cemetery and the golf course from enterprise to the general fund? Is that part of your motion?
My motion was not addressing that. It leaves it the way the mayor presented it, which was incorporating or moving those enterprise funds to the Parks and Rec Department. I was not addressing that. I was just simply explaining that by moving that into the 2018 budget, it makes it look like the Parks and Rec Department took a 23% increase in expenses. That's not the reality. Once you remove what the mayor moved, enterprise funds into the Parks and Rec Department, they took more of a 4% increase. But the previous year they had a 14% increase, which would give them an overall 2-year increase of 18%. I think they can pretty much maintain on that 14%, just my idea. And I'll say again what I said last year. If the council is looking to try to have a healthier, in my opinion, matching of their expenses to their revenues, that doesn't preclude any department who has a project to come before the city council and ask for the appropriated funds throughout the year, as they can identify if the Parks and Rec Department needs a piece of equipment and it happens to be the $268,000 that I'm asking for the budget to be removed. The city council can actually pass it to be approved at that point. It can go out for bid and they can purchase their piece of equipment. So I'm just simply looking for them to maintain their budget level.
So this also goes to what we've discussed before, which is to, in this particular move, you're replenishing it to undesignated cash. Therefore, we're spending less of that in this budget year. That is part of your intention as well.
Correct.
And I think I support that. And if you all remember at the last budget hearing, when the police came with that, they were not prepared for the funding on the body cams. That's an example of exactly what can be done, that we would identify a source for those funds, and we're readily able to do that, and that's something we can do throughout the budget year. And so that's what Alderwoman Scott is talking about, is those departments coming to us who are using this undesignated cash will instead come to the council and make a case for those particular things. And I think we're more than up to the job to be able to do that. And I think it's important when it comes to fiscal responsibility, as we all support. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of our citizens have no idea. I mean, even after the discussion on undesignated cash, I'm going to be honest with you, if less than 0.1% of who were watching, which would be 0.1% of the population of Rapid City, so that ought to give you some sort of number, understand what undesignated cash is. I think if you asked 10 people up here what undesignated cash was, you might get, I would say, 4 or 5 definitions. I would think some of us might agree. Yeah, I know, but I don't think some people on this council still understand what undesignated cash is. That's just my opinion. But I have a question, Chair, if you can, because I'm not understanding where we're going. We're actually voting on the entire appropriation when, in fact, I'm wondering how we're adding amendments as we have previously. We voted on them separately as we moved towards. So I don't know, we used to make a list of all of the amendments that we were going to vote on, because when you're making motions and you're making amendments to motions, you can only do that so many times, is my understanding. Wait, if I can, I'd like to ask the city attorney.
Absolutely.
Can you weigh in on that? Because this is a budget hearing, so I was hoping we were going to make a list of all of the motions that we wanted to be made on the 2018 budget and then vote on all of those separately as we led up to voting on the appropriation. So my question to you is, we've already had an amendment. How many amendments can be made to the motion to approve the budget itself? Because I have a couple of things that I want to attempt to amend.
Thank you, Alderman Laurenti. This is the question that I had posed about a half hour ago, because I knew there was some more discussion to be had. So it looks like we're going to sit here until this is hammered out tonight.
Yeah, and I'm all for that. I have no problem with that, but I just want to make sure that we're doing it in proper form.
Yeah, let's hear the answer.
I don't know that there's a limit on the number of amendments. I think the rules have a limit of 2 substitute motions, but as far as amendments, I don't know that there's a limit on.
So when we say amendments, I mean, typically, I'm talking about the fact that we're wanting to vote on all of these things. So an amendment is just doing that. I thought we had a limit on the amendments to a motion, but you're saying that that's not the case. I'm just wondering how we'll be able to vote on, the final vote is going to be on all of the amendments, or are we going to vote on all the amendments separately and work our way back to the appropriation? That's what I'm trying to understand.
I think you would take each amendment. You'd propose an amendment.
Do we have those? Okay.
Propose an amendment. If you had a second, then you would take up that amendment. That would go, if you approved it, it would go on to the original motion.
So that's my question, Chair. Do we have this list?
As I understand it, Alderman Lewis presented a motion that included 5 items that we know from discussion that we're going to do. I think that's a vote, and any amendment
Mr. Chair, point of order on that one. No, there were 2 of them on Alderman Lewis's list that had not been discussed and approved, or that was the first time we'd heard them.
With the fire and the police department?
No,
Civic
with the,
Center.
well, with the EM, which is the
I counted
emergency,
3.
and the Civic Center.
Mhm.
Was there another one? And, well, and the police detox.
And
I
so
mean, that was brought up.
I think
but-
it's fair we talk about those 3 individually. But I think as part of Alderman Lewis's budget, or excuse me, motion, that we talk about those 3 remaining as part of that, and then we have to deal with his motion, then you can add on your amendments from there.
Point of order, I don't think that's what we were just discussing.
Yeah, that I think is the problem in the function of doing this, is that we're doing it, we're trying to add it on to a motion, when in reality we should be making a list of all of the things we want to either approve or deny to be added to the final appropriation, like we have done in prior years.
Point of order.
him.
I made a motion with inclusions on the motion. The motion stands alone with those inclusions. You can vote up or down on that motion, whether or not you like certain parts of it or the whole thing. Doesn't matter. You can discuss those items when we get back to the original motion, but we can keep adding amendments and disposing of those as we go, unless I'm completely incorrect on that. But then we work our way back down to the original motion, then you can discuss the merits of that motion. But at this point, right now, we're discussing each individual amendment you come up with, or you can make multiple amendments or whatever you want. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's right.
Okay, Wade Nyberg, did you have an item to add to that?
I was just going to say that you can make an amendment to add to it. You can also make an amendment to take away. So if you want to address one of the things included to say remove that from the original motion, that's another amendment you can discuss.
All right, and Pauline Sumption, just want to get through the staff here so that we're clear.
I'm trying to figure out a way to make it most clean. And I know what Alderman Lewis was trying to do with the stuff that has kind of been brought forward already. But I think the cleanest part would be to make the motion. So in my mind, and Wade can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have already voted on the Journey on Allied Arts. So we already know that we have to amend the ordinance presented tonight to include what you have already approved through the previous stuff. So as far as I'm concerned, we already know to add those. Then from there, honestly, I would take each one separately and say amend the ordinance by adding or subtracting, and then at the end have a motion to approve the ordinance as amended.
I'll clarify my motion to reflect her comments, so just include the first, if it's okay, or the second, or if I can just clarify my motion to include the two things we approved, the Journey Museum and the Allied Arts, and the other 3 things will be individually discussed. That's okay with the seconder? Richie?
Yes, he said that was okay.
Okay. Is that okay with point of order?
We have an amendment on the floor, not a substitute.
Is that okay to do that way? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, just so I'm clear, let's just make sure we all know what's going on here. We have, Alderman Lewis has agreed with the second by Nordstrom to reflect Pauline Sumption's request that we take what we have already, and we've already passed the Allied Arts and the Journey Museum. We need to discuss the fire and emergency management, $14,500, the police department's adjustments with the body cams and 102 reduction from detox, and the Civic Center's addition of $9,000 for their sales and marketing. Is that added as an amendment to the ordinance?
Point of order, can we do that and vote on that part tonight and then make those other amendments at another, or do we have to do it all tonight?
Technically, again, Wade, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can make some amendments tonight, and if you wanted to call it, you do not approve first reading, or you can still approve first reading as amended, make additional amendments moving forward, and have second reading of the ordinance on September 5th.
We also have the amendment of the Parks and Rec reduction of $268,000 from Alderwoman Scott as well as, and that's the one on the floor, so that's the first one we have to talk about so far. All right, if we are clear on where we're at, Ms. Alderwoman Modrick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm talking about the current amendment on the Parks and Rec, and because we don't have the department head here, Mr. Bigler, I think I probably need to ask somebody that's going to have the information on the $268,000. I don't know if it would be Sean or if it would be the mayor. I think I'll start with the mayor. He can defer, but we hadn't addressed this during department discussions, and the $268,000 is being pulled to put back into undesignated cash, but what does that do to what your proposal is? What is it going to do to the department? And I'll start with there because then I have an add-on regarding what a council does when they start throwing in money down the road. So I'll start there.
Thanks for that question. I need to point out that I have gone through all the departments and spent extra time with the general fund departments to squeeze every dollar out of their 2018 request. We have discussed the consequences of removing money out of those budgets. And just in the general fund departments alone, we have reduced their 2018 proposals by $1.8 million. So I can say with confidence, and this is not to be snarky or anything like that, I can say with confidence, this type of reduction will result in a reduction of service. We cannot keep the same level of service, especially in light of the reductions we've already made, without putting an end to something.
And I think that's what, I certainly got that loud and clear, and I really appreciated when each department came before us and spoke about where they're at with this current budget and what they had proposed, and then where the mayor trimmed from what they had originally proposed. We have the documentation in here on that. And each one of them, I proudly can say this, said, they mentioned service. The city of Rapid City has worked really hard on bringing in the service into each department and then providing that service to the city and its citizens. And that is key. And so if we lose services that we work so hard to bring up to where we should be, then, and we do it with one department, eventually we're going to do it with all. And when the statement's made, well, let's just throw this one in and let's throw $268,000 into undesignated cash. And remember, undesignated means it hasn't been designated. You want to set a policy to designate it, it no longer exists. Policies are important. Right now, we don't have that. But if we start trimming without education any department that we've currently got before us, that we've allowed to speak to us, we haven't generated a push to them to take more money out of your budget, and then the statement, well, they can always come back to us. On the police department, that was a grant, and we approved the fact that we had to put up the funds for that grant, and we approved to do so. That wasn't all of a sudden an equipment need that had failure, and then this council would be very subject to would they approve or not approve. If we don't provide our departments with what their budgets are so that they can plan forward on those today and tomorrow and in 5 years from now with what they're doing, then we're doing them a disservice, and we are certainly taking away the services from the city and its community. So it's important that we provide the budgets and then we allow them to work within their budgets. One of the things that we get is, where's your funding source? And if it says budgeted, we stand pretty strong to approve that because it's already showing it's in their budget. And then they can confidently say, we're ready to make this purchase. But if we start saying, well, we're going to open up the checkbook and you just come and tell us when you have a need, that's bad business, that's bad governance, and we're not protecting our funds. So we shouldn't just open up the checkbook and make that statement. We need to provide a budget, and then we need to stand on that budget for the entire year and allow that department to do the job that we've given them to do and maintain from within their budgets. And we need to do it right. So thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for that.
Thank you. Go to the finance officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to tag off the mayor's comments, of that approximately 1.8 that he cut between the department's request and what he presented to you, 371,000 of that already came from Parks and Rec Department, so which is 3% of their overall budget.
Okay. Alderman Nordstrom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pauline, you just have to correct me if I'm in error of this, but if this 268,000 is cut and goes back into undesignated cash, then if I understand the current policy from undesignated cash, it's a one-time funding source. They can only fund whatever they're requesting one time. for their budget. Or if they want to come in front of CIP and make a request, which I don't support either, they would have to do that as well to explain what they need for their department. And I keep coming back to some of the things that are unfinished business at the Parks Department. We just had a discussion here about a year ago, maybe less, on removing trees, and one of the biggest things was we're not even removing trees that we have. So that's where I'm stuck at, is that they have such great need over there, and if my math is correct, it'll be close to $500,000 that we're going to cut out of the Parks Department totally if this 268 is also granted. So I can't support this anyway.
Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just want to clarify a couple definitions again. When the mayor mentioned that he reduced $1.8 million from the department director's requests for 2018, those requests, if he reduced $1.8 million, actually exceeded or were on top of the percentages of increase that the departments got from 2016 to 2017. So overall, the general fund, I'll repeat it again, was increased in expenses 7% in 2017 and $3.5 million, as presented by the mayor for 2017 budget, was used from undesignated cash to balance the 2017 budget. The 2018 budget, congratulations to the mayor for reducing the department director's requests for budget of $1.8 million, still shows a 4% increase in the overall general fund from 2017 to 2018, which in the 2 years is an 11% increase overall in the general fund. So as long as this city council is comfortable with spend, and may I remind everybody what the chief financial officer said is that as of July 31st, 2017, the undesignated portion of our checkbook is in the negative. So, yeah, thank you, Alderman Laurenti, for snickering down there. So I'm glad to hear that the council is comfortable spending in the negative. I guess we're all going to be spending on a credit card waiting for the funds to come in. So I would like to ask the chief financial officer a question, if I may. Pauline, as it was stated up here by a councilwoman, that we need to set a budget and we need to stick to it. And we're going to pass the mayor's budget and then we're going to stick to it. Can you tell me the last time the city of Rapid City went through a whole year without appropriating undesignated cash from the general fund?
When I spoke earlier about the 2010 when I was speaking the original budget, and as I look back, it was actually 2011, and it wasn't zero, it was like $450,000. We've always used some level. And quite honestly, like I said earlier, we used to use over $4 million to balance, which is close to 10% at the time. But at the time, we also were having turnback of budget that was unspent that still exceeded that, so we did not dip into our undesignated cash at the end of the year. There's been a couple years that we have, and one year in particular that we dipped into our reserves. And so it happens both ways. It's never will I have a perfect budget where revenues match expenditures exactly.
Thank you. So I feel like I'm a broken record up here for 2 years in a row, so I'll yield.
Thank you, and now go to Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to speak about this too, because this was one of the areas that I brought up as well in last year's budget as well. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I think it's a little disingenuous for anybody on this council to say that services will be cut. The mayor has introduced a priority-based budgeting. We are all very familiar with it. There are first, second, third, and fourth quartiles for every department. Those third and fourth quartiles are not, my guess, let me just say fourth quartile, are not critical services. So if there's something that needs to be pulled back, I highly doubt that our citizens are going to notice that the Parks and Recreation is going to have to come to council for 3%. 3% of their budget. That means they're getting 97% still of what's in the budget today. Think that through, people. I mean, seriously, we're gonna try to tell the public that the sky is falling because the Public Works is not gonna get 3% of their budget. They're getting 97% of it. Go convince some of your citizens of that. Good luck with that.
Okay, I see no one else in the queue. So the amendment, as it is, that we need to address individually is an adjustment to the Parks and Recreation budget of removal of $268,000 from that department budget and place it into undesignated cash. Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed?
No.
Aye. Motion fails. Amendment fails, excuse me. Yep.
Drury. Lorente. Armstrong. Lewis. Solomon. Modrick. Nordstrom. Drew. Scott. 3 to 6.
4 to 5.
Who's the fourth one? I have Drury, Lorente, and Drew voting. Scott, I'm sorry. It was just your motion, sorry. 4 to 5.
4 to 5.
I was just putting it in the right column to begin with.
All right. Should we move on to emergency management from the fire department amendment?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, the motion from Lewis is to approve the fire department's emergency management match of $14,500 out of undesignated cash. Alderwoman Scott. Yes.
It's not for the fire department budget. It's
Excuse me,
for
emergency management.
Pennington County Emergency Management is a separate item.
Thank you. Yeah, it came from the fire department, but it's for the emergency management. Yes. Amanda Scott is in the queue. Amanda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you wouldn't mind, I know that I'm having trouble. Mr. Willett? Dustin Willett. Mr. Willett, I kept saying, and I was trying to do it backwards. Mr. Willett came in and he made this request known, and it was supported by Chief Seals, who was here. But would you mind explaining again, just for the public record, what we're voting on for this 14.5?
Yes, and as I understand it, and Mayor, I'll look to you to correct me if I'm wrong. The chief mentioned that we have a 50-50 agreement with the county to provide emergency management services. All in all, at the end of the day, our match for that is $14,500 as per our agreement. Is that, Pauline?
Actually, it's more than that, but that's what was not included. It was accidentally cut because it wasn't clear when Mr. Willett said that he could cut X dollar amount, that meant half came from the city and half came from the county, and the full amount was cut from the city. So we need to add our half back in.
We got to throw it back in. So that's where that $14,500 comes from. And so that's our match on that. It has to come from somewhere. 50-50 match. So from undesignated cash, unless somebody has any other thing else. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion carries. The next item is the police department, and just so I'm clear on this, the police department had a budget item of $102,000 that was going to go towards the detox program that we no longer have to put towards that. However, they do need the $100,000 for the body cam program, and so Chief Jaggeris has requested that we shift those funds to cover that grant that they expect to receive in the next year.
I move that for that amendment.
Motion and a second by Lewis. Amanda Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just want to clarify
Absolutely.
that there will be $102,000 being removed from the police department and going into undesignated cash. And the second part of this motion is to take $100,000 of cash and put it back into the police department specifically for body cameras.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that is the motion from Alderwoman Modrick and a second by Lewis. Pauline Sumption?
I just want to clarify.
Okay.
Do you want the 102,000 even, or do you want the amount, the exact amount that Chief Jaggers gave us, which was 102,573?
102, the exact amount, 102,573. Thank you for the exact amount. And the rest will just stay towards undesignated cash. All right, Mayor Allender?
Sorry to be nitpicky. The 102,000 came from an estimate from Pennington County on the city's portion of the detox budget. That portion now has been reduced by the 102,000 and change, and so that's where the money for the body cameras will come from, not from within the PD budget, just to clarify that.
Yes. Procedurally, we're putting it one in the bucket and coming back out. Can you give me that figure again?
573.
573. Okay, should I reread the motion, or are we good? All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have a Civic Center sales and marketing budget item. They needed $9,000. That was not accounted for in their budget. This item came to me from the finance office. Do we have any other clarification of this item?
It is a salary line item commission for our marketing employee that sells the sponsorships, is my understanding. Tracy can correct me if I'm wrong. It was, yeah, they just forgot to include it in the original request.
They make money and get commission on that money.
Yeah, they have funds within their revenue streams to cover it.
Okay.
Make that motion.
The motion by Lewis, second by Laurenti. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion carries. All right, we have dealt with all of the amendments as I know them to be so far. Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to make a motion to reduce the Public Works budget by $500,000. And if I can get a second, I'd like to explain. Thank you. So in looking at this is just another effort in trying to make our undesignated cash or trying to quit dipping into monies that may or may not be there, trying to balance a budget. And so in looking at the Public Works Department, what I looked at there, okay, so where I'm trying to do is I'm trying to pinpoint, because the pushback I got last year during our one budget hearing, in which I tried to get a reduction in the overall budget, as I said, across the board, and whoa, was there pushback. And it was like, oh, you can't do that to all the departments. So I actually did some homework, and I'm trying to do this without getting into the weeds of line items, and yet I'm still hearing pushback. So I would just ask all of our council members for the 2019 budget, please bring some philosophy to here so we at least know what your viewpoint is before we waste 4 different meetings and really don't end up doing anything to correct our situation. Sorry, in my opinion. So, $500,000 in the Public Works. I looked at that because in 2016 to 2017, the Public Works Department had a 6% increase. And in 2017 to the 2018, both proposed by the mayor, it's increasing an additional 4%. Plus, the Public Works Department gets a interdepartmental charge of over $1 million from the CIP to offset salaries and wages. So in looking at their $15,500,000 or $15,100,000 budget for proposed 2018, I would hope that they could try to do with $500,000 less in their 2018 budget, since they received a 6% increase last year. So I'm basically just asking them to do with a slightly less increase in 2018. Thank you.
Okay, the amendment on the floor is given by Amanda Scott and seconded by Steve Laurenti, is to reduce the Public Works budget by $500,000, place that money into undesignated cash. All in favor?
Drury? Aye. Lorente? Aye. Armstrong? No. Lewis? Solomon? That was a no. Modrick? No. Nordstrom? No. Drew? No. Scott? Here. 3, 2, 6.
6, the amendment motion fails. Any other items we need to address? Alderman Laurenti, you have the floor, sir.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to offer a motion to move, actually to leave the cemetery, the reallocation of the 2 enterprise funds, leave the cemetery as designated this year in this year's budget to the general fund, because I think that one is one, and to move the golf course, or to move the golf course back to the enterprise fund as was originally, has been for many, many, many years. If I can get a second. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'd like to maintain the floor.
Yeah, so just to make sure, motion to leave the cemeteries as is in the general fund, but shift that golf course out of the general fund back into its enterprise fund as it has been.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And I bring this motion forward. As you all know, I spoke about this a little bit before. The reality is that the difference between the cemetery and the golf course is that the cemetery is a diminishing return situation for unfortunate reasons, for sad reasons, obviously. But in my opinion, the golf course is a very different enterprise fund. It's a lot like many of the other enterprise funds that we have. And what's important for council, not just this council, but for all future councils and councils that I've been on prior to this one, was the importance of understanding that the enterprise fund has that onus on making sure that their fees for their services covers the services that they provide. And that responsibility, that is something that is easily communicated to us when they have to borrow from the general fund to subsidize their effort. You heard me speak with Parks and Rec, Mr. Beegler, and my questioning with him. They're very reluctant, honestly. I mean, they believe, if you will, that since they're in the middle, and I'd like to see that data, I'd love to see that data. We're told that they're in the middle as far as cost for golf here in Rapid City, but I want to see that data. I'd like to see that. Maybe we should request that. But the reality is it's not broken. Leaving them in the enterprise fund has always been very good for the city budget because it highlights the subsidy, if there is one, and it would also highlight their ability not to take a subsidy. So it's a positive as well. So if we allow them to be moved to the general fund, it makes it much easier for that not to be talked about. And so I'm hoping my colleagues will support this amendment. Thank you.
See no one else in the queue. All in favor of Steve Laurenti's motion, second by Modrick, to leave cemeteries where they are, move the golf courses as they have been to the enterprise fund. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
No.
We have one no from Nordstrom. The ayes have it. Alderman Nordstrom, that's right. All right. Next, Amanda Scott, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. I'd like to make the motion to remove the revenue stream of the CIP increase in the 2018 budget. If I can get a second, or CPI, did I say CIP? CPI, Consumer Price Index.
Okay. Will you say that again for me?
I would like to make an amendment to remove the revenue stream of the Consumer Price Index of 1% from the 2018 budget. If I can get a second, I'd like to retain the floor.
Okay, you had that from Laurenti. You still have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. I know, generally speaking, in most governmental agencies, the property tax and the Consumer Price Index of whatever stated or 3% and property tax should take it is usually pretty good guidance for any government agency. I was going to say municipality, any government agency to take. But it's really hard to take that when we are absolutely plentiful in undesignated cash to balance our budget, number one. And number two, seriously, this is the point, we have had such huge growth in the last few years that with the growth of our property tax, it's kind of hard to put that burden and that onus on the taxpayers without some really, really good direction on what that additional funding revenue source is going to support going forward. So I would recommend for at least the 2018 budget, as we take a look at more programs throughout the city that can be shuffled around and reappropriate funds more in line with our revenue streams in future years, that we don't necessarily need this influx of cash. Thank you.
And we're going to a finance officer, Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, and I'm just going to do my due diligence and warn y'all on a couple things. I believe Mr. Lewis stated it fairly well the other night when he talked about this, where this is basically because the cost of goods are going up. If we want to maintain our services at the level that we have, we should be taking the CPI. You'll never hear me say we don't need the CPI, because the cost of our goods and services, whether it's the employees' pay or the tires that we need or the blades on the snowplow, those costs are constantly going up. That's my first point. Second point, with the growth that we have experienced this last year, and with the one TID in particular coming back online, I fully anticipate that the mill levy will actually go down for the 2018 taxes. Not guaranteed, but looking at the numbers, to me it would make sense that they would. Having said that, I know Wade and I worked to prepare the resolution in case you guys did pass it for the Legal and Finance Committee next week, that if the valuation in 2017 remained absolutely the same as the valuation for the city in 2016, it would add $3.20 per year on a $100,000 home. That's less than 30 cents a month. Third point is that with the additions tonight, we're now sitting at over $1.4 million of undesignated cash. And I know she was saying, kind of tongue-in-cheek, where we have lots and lots of undesignated cash, but I am not comfortable going much further than that, this 1.4. And so if you do what she has made the motion to do, which is remove the CPI and just increase the undesignated cash, as a finance officer, I want it on record that that is not my recommendation, and I would not feel comfortable with that. Thank you.
Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to encourage my colleagues to support this. This is really important. I mean, you guys all have seen the numbers that I've given you, and this is from the finance office. This isn't Steve's numbers. This city sees, we have not, at least in the last 10 years, and for a long time prior to that, I think the rises might have been at least 4.5%, sometimes higher than that. But the city sees $2.3 million in additional income on the average every year for the last 10 years. 4.5% on the average increases in income, revenues, tax revenues, and we still keep spending money out of undesignated cash. And I applaud the mayor's move. That was a big move, and I'm hoping, and this is another reason why we shouldn't be taking it, because the priority-based budgeting is just really starting to kick in. The mayor's talking about it. And the reality is he's already talking about some of these programs, as y'all heard him say, all these programs that may be coming forward over just this year. Not the following year and the year after, because remember, this tax increase isn't just for a 2018 budget year. It's every year. It's every year after we approve this. It's $1.6 million to the taxpayers over the next 10 years. So it's not just for this budget year. Just remember that. We're putting this onus on them every year. And this fable, if you will, that we need to take the CPI to cover increased costs. Are you kidding me? Plus the $2.3 million additionally that we get every year? What? And that's not just on growth. That's not new properties, because we all own homes. Are you all paying the same property taxes you did when you first bought your home? No, we shouldn't be. That's what I'm saying. The growth in our revenues is a lot from the same homes that aren't demanding any more government service than they were When I bought my house and it was built in 1994, that house isn't demanding any more government services, but I'm paying double the taxes. So that's the whole point there. This thing that says, well, all that $2.3 million is being eaten up by all of the services, the new services. That's baloney. That's absolute baloney. I'm making more money than I did in 1996, and I spend that oftentimes in Rapid City, more than I did in 1996. That revenue is coming to the city, and that's every citizen in Rapid City who's making more money than they did back in 2006, 10 years ago, those figures I gave you. And they're spending those additional funds in Rapid City. They aren't demanding any additional services. They're just spending more of their new income. And we want to take more of that, a larger portion of it, because somehow we cannot budget on 4.5% increases on the average. And I'll say it again. How many of our citizens get a 4.5% increase in their income every year? And then say to somebody, well, I need some money from you. That's not enough. Boss, I need to talk to you. That 4.5% increase I've been getting over the last 10 years, it's not enough. Come on, let's get real. Government is not different than the people that we represent. This needs to be voted down, and we need to make sure this government is accountable to the people. And that means we need to spend what they give us and not say it's not enough. Because that's what we do when we raise taxes like this, and we're raising it in perpetuity. It's not just for this budget year. I yield.
Thank you. Go to Becky Drury.
Thank you, Chair. I just think that what we've done tonight, and whichever way you voted, we supported the arts, and we supported them big time. And I think that that's a message that we're sending out to our constituents, is that we support the arts. Well, I also think that we need to send the message to our constituents that we're fiscally responsible, and no one likes tax increases. I mean, man, when I was walking door to door, people had just gotten their evaluations, and they were mad about it, and they said, what are you going to do? And I never promised anything, but I tell you what, I'm not going to vote to raise their taxes, because that is not what they wanted me to do.
Thank you. Pauline Sumption, you're in the queue. So you have the floor.
2 clarifications. And I just need to ask a question, Mr. Laurenti, if he doesn't mind. The $2.3 million a year, are you including the whole 2 cents in the sales tax? Because my calculations are different. If it's...
I'm using the figures that you gave me, and the difference between 2006 total revenues, property and sales tax, are a little over $23,100,000 and some $1,000 lower than what we're getting today, which is an average of $2.3 million in growth over the last 10 years for each year.
I just need to look at those again, because it's not...
They're right off that spreadsheet you gave me.
Yeah, it's not ringing correct in my mind, but again, I haven't looked at it for a while, so I just wanted to ask that question.
Yep.
I just want to, and then my other clarification, and I honestly wasn't planning on speaking on this, but just because you request CPI does not mean their taxes are going up. The city has nothing to do with evaluations. That is, state law requires the county equalization office to value your property at the fair value. They look, that is on them to come up with those. As a property owner myself, yeah, I don't like my higher taxes, but my higher taxes are because my valuation's going up. So you know what that means? When it comes time to sell my house, when I want to downsize, it's worth more to me. I have more equity. I have more assets in my name when that happens. And I know it's hard to correlate asking for $161,000 in property tax revenue that's spread across everybody, and again, less than 30 cents a month at worst case scenario for $100,000 for each $100,000 versus how much their valuation is going up. And just reiterating what Alderwoman Scott said the other day, the city only gets 18% of that tax bill. We can only control our portion of that tax bill, but what we control is also only part of the equation. And it's very difficult to get people to understand that. I do fully anticipate that the mill levy will go down, and has in the past few years, because growth, even when we've taken CPI, because growth has exceeded that CPI level. And so even if the total tax bill doesn't go down, the mill levy, which is what it's based off of, does go down, and that helps in the long run, because if it stays high and their valuation continues to go high, whether we ask for more money or not, their tax bill is going to be higher. So just education. It's hard.
Okay, Alderman Nordstrom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to remind folks, to clarify my points, is that two main ones is that the $15 million and plus is equivalent to what the police department is. To me, that's a tangible number to take a look at. The $15 million that is coming in on the property tax, so close to what the police department is requesting for their budget. $15 million and some change. So close. There's a few $1,000s difference between the two. So that is tangible for me. That is what our property taxes go for. And the other part of it, for the CPI, in my ward, there is approximately what our property tax would increase would be off the CPI would be one senior coffee at McDonald's. One senior coffee. That's all our property tax increase would be with just taking the CPI. Remember, we're also taking in additional roads this last year. We need somebody to inspect those roads. That does not come out of CIP. We're taking in additional residents within the city who are needing calls for service. We're also probably sending out the ambulance occasionally to these new citizens as well. And then I'm reminded that we have several frequent flyers on that. We've also done some annexed area within the city this last year that is going to be needing service. So for me, the other tangible that I'm seeing, we talk about the property tax being used for different things, and we've also used the rationale for fixing roads and everything. Well, somebody's got to inspect those roads and make sure they're done properly. I had a street renovated in front of my house a few years back. That didn't come cheap either. And the employees that were monitoring that and fixing it, putting it back to the condition that it needed to be, somebody had to be there for inspection of that. And I also remember my final point is that we did have a speaker come in front of us that he said he admitted he probably in the minority, but he said he would be willing to pay the extra tax on whatever he's paying for his property tax, just so that we can get some better services within the city of Rapid City. So my caution is that, for me, the tangible, the $15 million is equivalent to what the police department is. So if we restart reducing this property tax, be careful about reducing the life safety for the city of Rapid City as well. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion on the floor, as I understand it, is to reduce the revenue stream of the CPI that the mayor presented in the 2018 budget. Is that correct, Alderwoman Scott? Is that as you?
Yes.
Okay, and she says you want to include the undesignated cash? Okay. All right. So all those in favor of Alderwoman Scott's motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Yep, I had a feeling. So can we get a roll call, please?
Modrick? No. Nordstrom? No. Drew? No. Scott? Aye. Drury? Aye. Lorente? Aye. Armstrong? No. Lewis? No. Solomon? 3-6.
Okay, that item is underway. Any other amendments that we need to address? Looking all the way down the line. Anybody else? So, now back to the original motion that we had in place. Oh, Mr. Nordstrom. Yes. Yes, I'll reread it.
Yes, please.
Huh? Yeah, do it. Okay, great. I appreciate that. We are, the motion is to do as amended, which the amendments just include, we have the fire, the police, the civic center, the Allied Arts Fund, and the Journey Museum funding. And I believe that's all we have. Mr. Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really support what the mayor is trying to do with this priority-based budgeting. We're not quite there yet, and I've gone to a couple of these sessions for understanding priority-based budgeting, and I really encourage other council members to take one of those courses. Now, I've gone twice. They are a little bit different from what we have been learning over this last year, so I'm hoping that we get to the point where the actual priority-based budgeting process gets in full swing. That's what I'm really looking for, but we're not there yet. The other major component that I feel that we need to address on this is the public participation in priority-based budgeting. Get all of those P's out there. So that's my issues for this year, so that we can look forward for the next year for a better, well-organized, better transparent priority-based budgeting, because I think what the process that I've seen and understood of what priority-based budgeting means, we aren't there yet. We've just got to move a little bit farther along the line to understand what priority-based budgeting really is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. Before we vote, just want to thank everybody for a good evening of discussion. It was a good learning experience for me personally. I really admire your viewpoints. We all come from this good places, I know that, and so a lot of good heavy lifting was done tonight. So the motion on the floor to approve as amended. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Absolutely not. Okay, let's do a roll call. I can tell you who that is, but.
Nordstrom? Drew? Yes. Scott? No. Drury? Lorente? No. Armstrong? Yes. Lewis? Aye. Solomon? Aye. Modrick? Aye. 6-3 split.
6-3, so we have completed the first reading of the budget. We'll have a subsequent reading at a future city council meeting. With all that, I will move to adjourn. Excuse me. No, that is a good point of clarification. Because we got the first reading done tonight, we will not need a future budget hearing meeting. We can include this in a future city council meeting for the second reading. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I already did. Oh, excuse me, I didn't hear it. Motion by Lorenzi, second by Drury. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?